Hey everybody, just a quick reminder before we get the episode going that your support means a great deal to me. If you are able to support the channel financially, please do go to 10percenttrue.com, hit subscribe and pick one of the packages. For £5, $6.50 a month, you get early access and ad-free access to my content. And for a little bit more than even that, you also get access to AMA and private Q&A sessions that are run directly with my guests through Zoom call at least once a quarter, probably more often than that. I'd appreciate your support. Anyway, let's get on with the episode. Buck, welcome back to 10% True. It's great to see you again.
Good to see you again, mate. Thanks for having me back to tell a little more gunship lore.
I'm so looking forward to it. I said this to you last time. I was looking forward to both of these episodes, and if I had to pick one, this was the one that I was most looking forward to. So, yeah. Okay, so for the viewer at home, clearly there's been an episode before this. If you haven't listened to that, I would recommend you go and do that actually, because Buck laid out in quite some detail and using some visuals how the AC-130 works, how they strike targets, what the weapons are. I'm talking about the Spectre Gunship principally, and the way in which the aeroplane is operated, weapons effects, and so on and so forth. And I think probably today that understanding is going to help to add some color and to fill in some of the details around what Buck's going to talk about, which is standing up the weapons school, going to combat, and being weapons school squadron commander. And then I think at the end we're going to have some time to maybe talk about the future. So what's not to be excited about? And before we get into it, though, just as always, I just want to say thank you to my subscribers, to the people that go to 10percenttrue.com, hit subscribe, and make a small monetary donation each month in exchange for ad-free episodes and early access. That really does make a difference. You guys are helping to keep this channel going. You should know that, and you should also know that I'm very grateful to you for doing that. Anyway, that's it. No more from me for the moment then. So weapons school. Standing up weapons school. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's interesting to see how that whole process happened. And I'm a lot like Star Baby. A lot of my career is about stories and things that happen. And the lead up to weapons school is actually that I had decided to get out of the Air Force. I was probably at the top of my game in the gunship. I was an evaluator. Things, everything was going well. I wasn't being mistreated, and I absolutely loved it. But somewhere in the back of my mind, it was still percolating that the Air Force had broken a couple promises to me. And I wanted another challenge. And when I graduated college, I knew I was going to pilot training, but to soothe my mom, I applied to med school, took the MCATs, and I got in. And that was always ringing in the back of my head. Maybe that is a path that I want to explore. So as it was coming up on time to decide what I was going to do, I decided to go ahead and reopen that door, reapplied, and I was accepted to go to med school. So I was really wrestling with that choice, and I didn't mention it to anybody in the squadrons, any of the leadership or anything. I didn't think they would put me feet on the ramp. I know some of the older guys have talked about what happened back in the 80s. If you declined the bonus, that was it. They sat you didn't fly. Some guys sat for over a year. And I didn't think that would happen, but I didn't want it to impact the way they were treating me. I was getting, I was doing a lot of good TDYs and great training with everybody. So I thought I'll just wait until the last minute and tell them what I have to. And about a month prior to that, I was approached by squadron leadership and one of my mentors, and they said, "Hey, just so you know, they've decided to stand up an AFSOC weapons school." And I thought, we don't need a standalone thing. They said, no, they're going to stand up 3 divisions and add it to the existing Air Force weapons school. And that really caught my attention. And they had decided they were going to stand up an AC-130 WIC, an MH-53 Pavlo WIC, and an MC-130 WIC. And they said, hey, they're going to have a board. They're going to select initial cadre, and we really think you should apply. And I was really walking down that path of going to med school, and I thought, okay, whatever, put my name in. But in the back of my mind, I knew when the time came, they weren't going to pick me, and I was going to go off and do this other thing. So a month later comes, I get called in to see the squadron commander, and he has printed out the paperwork. And at that point, with the bonus with the Air Force changes every couple of years, but you could sign for 5 years, you could sign to the 20-year point, or you could sign to the 25-year point, or you could decline. And he pushed it across the table and he said, Craig, we're really hoping you're going to stay. Here's all your options. And he goes, oh, by the way, the results of the board came out and you have been selected as initial cadre at the weapons school. And man, it was like it hit me because I wasn't expecting it. And I thought, wow, what a tremendous honor. And then he said, however, I'm really short on IPs and I can't let you go.
Hmm.
And I'll make sure that I get you in the first class. And that to me was just a switch in the back of my head. It's like, here we go again, another broken promise. It took me 0.69 seconds, and I said, thank you, sir, I decline. And I signed decline on the paper and pushed it back across the table. And I just, it was almost a visceral reaction when he said that to me. And he didn't say much after that. He said, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. And then I left his office and I went to go fly a TAC line. I actually flew that night. The next day, I went home that night after the sortie and talked to my wife, told her what happened, and said, okay, time to save money. I'm going to med school. We're getting out. And came back in the next day to fly another mission. I was flying quite a bit. And the squadron secretary said, hey, the boss wants to see you. So I go up to his office and he said, hey, I worked it out. You can go. And, now I'm like, now what the hell do I do? So that set off a course in my career. I don't know if it was good or bad that he got me to go because the next 3.5 years were an absolute grind going through weapons school. Ultimately, I signed the bonus paperwork, stayed at 25, and decided to go stand up the weapons school. Um, Most people, well, let me back up. A lot of the students that came through after we had the weapons school stood up would call the initial cadre the STMFs, the self-taught mother effers, because we taught ourselves. But what they didn't realize is I had to go through weapons school 3 times.
Did you?
3 times. And that was a grind. Each time I took all the tests. The first time we just went out there and we audited the program. The second time we had written some of the courseware. We were working on our teaching techniques, and it was murder boards from all of the other WICs, just ripping us to shreds, and justifiably so. And then the third time when we went through, it was to validate. So that was a pretty painful experience doing weapons school 3 times. It's a year and a half of my life that I really don't remember. And as hard as that was, I think any student that goes through the weapons school will say, "Oh, that was the toughest year or toughest, program I've ever done, toughest 6 months." The only person that works harder than a weapons school student is a weapons school instructor, because you're constantly trying to stay ahead. And you and I were, kibitzing just a little bit before this started about kids and stuff. I actually had a newborn when I was a DO in the weapons school. When I came back from sitting at a desk to go right back into the jet and start flying weapons school level sorties with a newborn, not getting much sleep, that was quite a challenge. But we set about. There was a small group of us. There were 2 H model pilots, 2 U model pilots, and we set about to write the syllabus. There was a lot of fighting going on back and forth. What are we going to teach? And I will never forget the first day showing up out at Nellis when we were going to audit the course. Um, the weapons school is a little bit different now. They have a brand new building where all the commandant sits. Before, it was just you walked in the main hall, the ops desk was to the left, the Reisner Trophy was there, the World Class Lounge was down the hall on the right. But we walked in just before, I think it was like 7:30 or whatever was the show time. We walk in, and there were a whole bunch of instructors standing there waiting for us. And it was all of the dudes and dudettes from the A-10 WIC. And they were there to help ensure our success. I cannot give them enough kudos for the things they did. I'll talk about it here in a little bit, but it started off. You and I have talked about a mutual acquaintance, Rain Man. I'm a big dude, 6'1", 225. Rain Man was 6'4", 250, and he put his giant arm on my shoulder. His claw grabbed me and then started walking me down the hall to the hog trough, which was their academic area, but also their bar. and we were drinking at 8 o'clock in the morning. And we weren't drinking, to get drunk or whatever. It was mentoring. I mean, it was serious mentoring. Don't do this. We want you to do this. We will help you. We're your sounding board. We're your biggest supporters. We're going to rip you to shreds on briefings. And when I think back on those folks, um, even when I came back as a DO and ops officer, it was the A10 and the HH60 wicks that just did the most for us. And if one of those guys called me today, I'd get my plane in launch to go help them. I think of some of the giants: Spam Milam, Trashman Hicks, Pooch Kapusak, Great American, Foot Millen. I mean, they were all just fantastic, and they gave so much of their time that helped us be successful. So we set about writing the courseware, breaking it into phases. Weapons school is a little bit different now, but back then you had a core one, and that's where everybody went to Nellis for a couple of weeks of academics on some of the various jamming techniques and just base level stuff. Then you went back to your individual WIC, and you had a couple of different blocks for us. We had weapons, we had CAS phase, we had strategic attack phase. And then you would come back to Nellis for phase two, do some more training based on doing integration with some of the other platforms in Wix, because that's really what weapons school has evolved into, is knowing how to integrate all the pieces of the great American hardware that we have out there. And then you'd go back home, do some more advanced training, come back out for what they call ME, or mission employment phase. That's the huge graduation phase at the end of weapons school. So I had, at one point, as we were working on the syllabus, I ended up with weapons phase. And I'm like, man, that is a lot of responsibility at the U.S. Air Force Weapons School, being in charge of weapons phase. I have to get this right. So I was all over the place. I went to one of the munitions, or one of the fuse factories. I spent time up at the headquarters. I spent time at the bomb dump. Anywhere I could get somebody to talk to me about our different munitions, how they functioned and all that. And then I started going to the other WICs because I thought it was, I didn't want it to be in an echo chamber of teaching just soft munitions. I, had to teach some of the other stuff, but I wanted to see their instructional technique. It wasn't necessarily about how, a GBU-31 V3 functions. It was how they presented it. So I spent time at Barksdale with the B-52 WIC, and I got to tell you, those guys were the pros from Dover when it came to weaponeering. They spent hours and hours, and their instructors were as polished as anybody I'd ever seen. They're the ones that help professionalize us with the Joint Munitions Effectiveness Manuals, the orange books. They're classified. You get in, you see all the details about weapons and frag patterns and all that. And then there's even a program that exists out there where you could plug in a building and do all your weaponeering and all that. But understanding how munitions worked. I spent time with the B1s. They were fantastic. Obviously the A10s. But I was out there and I said, okay, I need to see how some of the pointy nose guys do their stuff as well. And we had been told we have full access, go anywhere we want. So I said, you know what? There's an AMRAAM course coming up, taught by the light grays. I'm going to go sit in on that. I think it was like a 4-day course. And I said, it's totally new to me because I don't do air-to-air work, but I will grab some instructional techniques and see perhaps a different way of teaching. And I went to the class and I was turned away. I was like, oh, okay. I mean, and I was quite rudely turned away. So I went back down the hall, and the weapons school has a thing called the WICL, the World Class Lounge. And I had ducked in there for a minute. I was trying to, reset and think, what do I do now? The last thing I wanted to do was go, cry to mom. Oh, they won't listen. I always try to resolve things at my level, but I was not having any success. And I was sitting there when the commandant walked by, and he said, "Hey, Buck, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just trying to catch up on some stuff." And I didn't really have a good answer. He was wicked smart. And he said, "What's going on?" So I told him, and he's like, "Walk with me." And we go to his office, and the light gray squadron commander was called down to his office, and he said, "What part of full access did you not understand?" And they're like, "Oh, well, he doesn't." And he's like, "No." He's like, "The AFSOC guys all have security clearances higher than us. I didn't want to see their tapes. I understand what Paco was saying. I love the Eagles. I'm glad they're on my side. Um, and so I went in, sat down, did the course. The instructor would not make eye contact with me. The students wouldn't talk to me. They had study reviews and then they studied at night. Nobody would study with me. And at the end of the course, I took the test and got the highest grade in the class. So, whatever. So that made me, feel pretty good about myself. But it was a lesson learned, and it kind of comes full circle. And I'll skip forward just a little bit. I spent 3.5 years as an instructor the second time, went off, did a couple years of school staff, and I come back to be the DO and then the squadron commander. So in the future now, a couple of years, we all know what happened during OIF. Rather than go fight the Eagles, the Iraqis buried their jets in the sand. And, that's a testament to the light gray and the pros from Dover that they were. Like Paco said, they just killed everybody out there. And I thought, man, that is a true testament. Well, I'm in the hall, and one of the Eagle guys comes up to me and goes, "Hey, man, you got a minute?" And I'm like, "You actually know who I am, and you're talking to me?" And he's like, "Yeah, we're thinking about revitalizing Eagle Strafe. And we were wondering if you could, maybe help us with some of your courseware and some of your instructional stuff." And I thought, you've been flying orbits for so long, and you guys are so desperate to get into the fight because we were flying so much. Every single one of my pilot instructors had a distinguished flying cross. I mean, we were just nonstop combat, and here the Eagle guys are trying to, get in a fight. And part of me just wanted to say, "No, you're not read in. I can't." But the weapons officer was like, "Yes, come on, let's go down." Got the courseware out, laid it out. I don't think anything ever came of it, but they sure spent a lot of effort trying to wind up and look at that. So it was kind of a full circle event for me. We worked pretty hard, but one of our biggest enemies was AFSOC itself. There was institutional resistance. And I think I talked about this a little bit before. A lot of it was because I think AFSOC, for a long time, they were 23rd Air Force. They were always viewed as the bastard child of, Air Combat Command and what was going on. And then they stood them up as their own command. When they did that, because a lot of the C-130 guys that would flow over to AFSOC had come from Air Mobility Command. That Air Mobility Command mindset and model was what was employed for the hierarchy within the command. And what I mean by that is within a gunship squadron, when you got there, you were a co-pilot. Then you would move up to be, say, a first pilot, then an aircraft commander, then a shooter, then an instructor, and the top of that pyramid was an evaluator. That is not the case in the pointy nose world. We all know that. The patch wearer is at the top of the pyramid, and the evaluator is just like, "Yeah, whatever, give me my check ride so I get back to flying missions." And the institution, the old school institution that was AFSOC, just didn't want to have anything to do with it. So we were constantly in this battle of, hey, the chief of staff had a handwritten note that said, "Stand up the AFSOC weapons school. We're just captains. We're just trying to execute guidance. And we're dealing with all of this, incredible resistance." And what they would always say to me is, "Oh, they want to, all these fighter guys are trying to come in here and tell us how to do what we do, and they don't understand what we do." And the answer was, look, at that point, this is a year and a half, 2 years into the process, I'm like, I have never once had one of the Planinos guys tell me the tactic I was teaching was wrong. Not once. What they've always done and what weapons school was so good at was the debrief. It was flying the mission, taking solid notes of everything that happened, and then dissecting the mission with your ego at the door, admitting, which can be hard to do as a professional aviator, when you screwed up, and then finding out why you did. What was the root cause? And then derive a learning point, method, whatever it was that would stop you from doing that again. Because the ultimate goal was to have the most capable lethal force that you could and teach those things to the students. And I said, never once did they tell me the tactic was wrong. What they said was the way I taught it was wrong, and I might want to try this. And it took a while to overcome that. I'll flash forward again to give you another example because that continued I don't believe it's like that today, but it continued the 3.5 years that I was there the first time and the 3 years that I was there the second time. So the second time, I'm a squadron commander. And at Hurlburt, within the operations group, they would have what they called a weekly commit meeting where they would review, here's the airplanes we're going to generate, here's the missions, the local training, the test missions, and then any TDY to support exercises or things like that. And they would commit assets to those or deny, because we were high density, low demand. We couldn't do everything that everybody wanted. And the deputy ops group commander typically chaired the meeting. They had a big, long conference table, and the squadron commanders would sit there, except for me, because I was a weapons school guy. I had to sit in a chair against the wall. They didn't want me at the big boy table. I'm like, whatever. So they're going through, and it comes to December. And December is when mission employment phase happens, and that's when graduation is. And there was a bilat scheduled at the same time. Bilateral training, meaning you're going to go, work with the Task Force 160 or the Special Boat Unit or somebody. We did bilats all the time. But the Deputy Ops Group Commander really hated the weapons school. And he's like, nope, we're not going to do ME. The bilat's the priority. Too bad for the weapons school. They're just going to have to figure it out. And then he looked at all the other squadron commanders and he goes, you know what? Why don't we just shut this damn weapons school down? And one of the squadron commanders, who's now a 3-star, running the Air Force Academy, one of the worst humans I've ever met, stood up, turned around, and just stared at me and started clapping. And which is ironic because he hated the weapons school so much. Later on, as a wing commander, he would tell his patch wearers to take their patches off.
Really?
But anytime I was his vice commander and was sitting at the table when he tried to tell everybody to take them off. And one of the guys actually did. I was very disappointed. And he goes, that's what right looks like. Because I shouldn't have to, see a patch to know that you're a weapons school grad. It should just be obvious. But anytime he would deploy, he would surround himself with weapons officers. So it was just quite ironic. So I leave the meeting and I'm like, okay, I know how this plays out. I go back, I call the commandant. And I said, okay, here we go again. It's round 17. He's like, got it. He calls 57th Wing Commander. 57th Wing Commander calls ACC Commander, who calls the Chief of Staff, who calls the AFSOC Commander. And it's like, what the hell? What part of stand up and run this weapons school didn't you understand? And, that comes screaming back down, and they get all butt hurt, and I get my assets. And it fed into that horrible, horrible relationship. So in my mind, it was really sad because we were just stuck in the middle. We were trying to do what we thought was best for the command. And we were, in a lot of ways, not only with the debrief, professionalizing it, but we were killing a lot of urban legends within the community about how we did certain things, especially with munitions, because we got into the books and were able to prove things mathematically to people, where in the past it was just one instructor had this technique that he or she sort of taught based on the way they were taught, but it wasn't based on math or the way munitions actually functioned. So we cleared up a lot of misconceptions in that way. I talked about, some of the things like the 20 and the 25 millimeter, the sensitivity. We gained a much better understanding of how our munitions worked. And I'll bring that forward here. I have some videos and pictures to show of things we did. As part of that weapons phase, what always bothered me, and when I show you some videos, I think you might have noticed from the other video that the video is very grainy. What you see on these videos looks almost impossible, to tell what it is, but that's a function of the recording inside the airplane. It records at less than half the resolution of what we actually saw. And with the new MX sensors, MX 2025, it's phenomenal. They're looking with a 4K plane. It's just superb. But the old digital recorders were based on a VHS tape. But what that led me to always wonder was, how did we do BDA? We don't be on a training mission, and one of our key phrases is targets destroyed, and that would be the cue to safe the gun and move on to the next thing. But was that target really destroyed? So as part of setting up weapons school and weapons phase, I said, hey, we're going to get a sortie, and we're going to buy a bunch of brand new targets, which we did, bread van, school bus, a couple of tanks we got from Eglin, and they were all pristine. We got a separate area on the range, and we put an FCIF out there that nobody could shoot them. And then I took the students out there with an EOD guy who swept the ground for UXOs, and they got to walk all of those targets and look at them from different angles. And then the next day, we flew a sortie. We went out and shot them. And then I took them back out to the range, I forced them to spend a couple hours with their tapes and tell me what they did. And then the next day, we would go look and see what they really did. And the results at times were quite shocking. So let me see if I can find the share. That is the side of a tank. And if you can see my cursor, do you see this circle right here?
Yep.
That is an imprint of the front of a 105. And you can see the spalling that's happened here in the metal. But yeah, we don't do a whole lot to a tank, do we?
Wow.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think that. I mean, if you see,
I know.
see like 88 mil tank strikes on tanks in World War II, they go straight through them.
They do, and that's based, I think, a bit more on the velocity that they had. Our 105s, and here's a mock-up of a 105. Let me adjust my camera just a little bit. So when this comes out, this is 33 pounds. It's steel. It's got 6.6 pounds of Comp B inside of it that produces the explosion, and the fuse that's on the front. Typically, we used what was called an FMU 732. It had a couple different functions. It had a point detonating function, so as soon as it hit something, it would go off. It had a delay function, which was meant to get through a building or through a roof or get into a room or something. And with that little delay, it would go off. But that little circle you saw on the front of that tank would be it. The fuse hit, it detonated and caused the round to hit, but this front piece of the projectile was going 2,200 feet per second and put a little dent in the side of that tank. Now, were there ears ringing inside? Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to sat there and taken that shot. But yeah, we weren't going to kill tanks, and we weren't going to kill the turret of a tank. So you can see, yeah, we could mess up a school bus pretty good.
Which what is that 105 as well?
That's 105, 40 millimeter, and 20 millimeter. And kind of a funny story about that, when we did it, I had talked about the competition between the two different gunship squadrons, and we had worked really hard within the weapons school to quell some of that. So we had a family event where there's a range out on the Eglin complex that actually has bleachers, and it's set up for viewing of special events. And we went out there with an AC-130H and an AC-130U in formation on a day mission with our families sitting in the stands to go out and shoot up a target, and everybody rah-rah, have a big barbecue afterwards. So as it turned out, the U model broke about halfway through the sortie, and all the H model guys that weren't in the weapons school started taunting all the U model people about their, I mean, it didn't go according to plan, but the worst part of it was the target that the Eglin range folks had provided for us was a yellow school bus. And while we're wailing away on this school bus, my wife is in the stands and she hears this kid go, "Hey, Mom, why are they shooting the school bus?" So we probably didn't think that one through very well, but yeah. So fun times. All right, let me get back here. So what could we, as we learned going through here, are we going to get a K kill on a tank? No, now this one's been hit multiple times. Oops. But could we get a mobility kill? Yes. And we found certain vulnerable areas on the tank. If you blew the tread off, that would do something. Sometimes there was a steel grate back here on these for the engine compartment. We could definitely get through the grate and get a mobility kill that way. So we learned a lot. When it came to dealing or shooting people and all that, same thing. A lot of it was urban legend, and now I can't get out of this. Let's see. There we go. So I talked to you before about some of the proximity rounds that we had. We were really trying to, understand how capable that round was. And this is one way we did it. We had a whole bunch of these silhouettes set up out there, and we had a controlled number, and that was the only thing we shot at those particular silhouettes. And we went out there and graded, and as you can see, it was very capable, did quite a bit of damage. And when we get into combat, I'll tell kind of a story about having this come to fruition, unfortunately. So things went, continued. We just continued down track, testing things that we'd always wanted to know if we could do. One of the things, some of the AFSOC core missions back then were a little bit different than they are today because the war on terror, there was so much focus on ISR and killing bad people that in some ways we gave up some of our key core mission sets. One of the things that AFSOC would always practice, I practiced it many, many times, was going somewhere, seizing an airfield, setting up a FARP that we would then hit another objective to grab something, bring it back to that airfield, and then exfil it out on something faster. So we would, as the gunship, we would come in when they were doing the airdrop, we would suppress anything on the field. MC-130s would put out, paratroopers to seize objectives. Then they would come in and I've seen them actually land 3 MC-130s on the same runway at the same time.
Really?
Yes, we called it simul landings. And do that, everybody would exit, open their rear door. We would have the little birds from TF-160. They could pitch those out of the back, set the blades. They were cranked up and airborne in less than 5 minutes running combat ops. It was very impressive to watch, and we practiced that routinely. And so I've been on the ground at the airfield. I've been on the ground at the objective they're actually hitting, and the little birds are cycling in, providing devastating casts with a gunship overhead, seizing an objective. They go back, put it on a C-130, and then fly it out. So, but we had given up on a lot of those core mission sets, so we were trying to get back into training to some of those. And one of those things was, as a gunship, we had revitalized our low-level program. And there were only a couple of us that were qualified. They just didn't have the time and the assets to get everybody in the squadron back up to speed. But we had always wondered, if we came in at low level, how long would it take us to pop up and be able to be on orbit and start shooting, and at what altitude, and could we continue to climb while we did it, pop up, suppress a threat? And this is if we were called into some sort of selected medium or high threat mission set. Just how much risk do we have, but do we have TTPs to fall back on and do that? So we practiced all of that, and it was amazing, some of the lessons learned. I learned some negative lessons doing just that out at Nellis during an ME. I had one of the most negative experiences, and then I had one of the most positive experiences. So the negative experiences, if you've ever been to Nellis, the weather out there is typically fantastic, especially during the summer months. The winter months can be a little more challenging, and there are altitude deconfliction plans when the bad weather rolls in. And on this particular night, it was an LFE, large force exercise, a couple hundred airplanes in the air at the same time, and there was weather in all the layers. And I think there was even some icing that was denying a lot of the players from moving forward. I was doing a low level into the objective area. I started out on the east side and came screaming along low level across of the box, if you will. Managed to sneak through undetected while everybody else was turning around to go home. And then as I popped out into the western side, there's a big valley that drops off. None of my other air players were there. And I looked up, and there was the red tanker with all the red F-16s. And they just rolled down and came down and, to kill me, because here I was in the middle of the fight. I didn't know that everybody had turned around and gone home. So yeah, I was the sacrificial lamb that night, but I did make it to the objective area, which was kind of funny. So that was a negative event, getting shot down, which had only happened at one time. But I had a very positive event that I know one other person in the gunship community did this. He did it, as I recall, in a red flag. But I got to do it at an ME, and the way it played out was just perfect. So they hire other assets to come in and be adversary support. As ME was ramping up, especially later on, it would be like a full-blown war that was going on up on the range, and what happened on day one could impact day three. But they had ground players, because a lot of the TTPs that we were studying there, they were taking those downrange to do other things. As a result, we had ground players out there, and they had hired some adversary support in the form of a Hind. And the Hind was just ripping these guys to shreds. And the guy flying it, he's 25 foot off the ground at night. He just out there wailing on all the friendlies. And they were getting pretty tired of it. And the Pointy Nose guys never saw him. They didn't get him. So I had again snuck across the top of the container. I'm over on the western side. I'm working a target, and I see something out there running along the hill, just in my periphery vision. And I'm like, oh, what is that? I roll over, and sure enough, it's a Hind. So NVG's down. I get the crew energized, and I start driving for the point, talk the IR onto it, set it up, center the HUD, give me number 5 semi-auto rapid, number 6 dual target attack, going through the whole spiel, line them up, center the HUD, make sure you're recording. We're recording, sir. And then, as I'm shooting, I'm making gun sounds to make sure everybody understands. So at the end of a weapons school or a red flag sortie, you land, you go to maintenance debrief. That's a very quick function. And then you will typically send somebody to an air-to-ground debrief and an air-to-air brief, and then everybody will then go back to their respective sections to have a detailed brief about what you did. So I sent my co-pilot to the air-to-ground debrief with the navigator and a list of the targets we struck, and I proceeded right to the air-to-air debrief. I had the tape. The intel guys and some of the range guys would run it. They would score kills and stuff like that. I pulled them aside, handed them my tape, and said, "You're going to want to play this." And I told them what happened. So what they do is, it's a big giant screen of the range and all the other. It's like ACMI. Everybody's got their antenna. They're tracking what's going on, and you see all the players come across the great merge. And when somebody has an air-to-air kill, they can see the timestamp. They'll go stop, and they stand up. Conan killed the Viper, beaming north 16,000 and in 4808. They grade it, they write it down, and they hit play, and it starts going. Well, I've got my timestamp, and here it comes. And I say stop, and I stand up, and the guys around me immediately are like, what the hell is going on? Because we wore ACC patches, but when we were flying with our guys, we actually had a special patch that was half AFSOC, half Air Combat Command. Part of it was subdued, part of it was bright, just playing up on the joke. But all of my other patches, to include my weapons school patch, I had a subdued AFSOC patch on, and everybody is looking at me like, what? And I'm like, AC-130 killed the Hind, at 25 feet running north out of the container. And then until the officer hits play and you see him dead in the sights, and the place just erupted and everybody is dying laughing and having a good time. That was probably my high point at the weapons school, getting high fives and all that. And then, I strolled out of the air-to-air debrief, cock of the walk, pretty happy with myself. So that's the story I purposely didn't tell you. I thought you would enjoy that. Yeah, it was quite a lot of fun. So did that 3.5 years. Again, I was tired when I left. I had been picked up to go to Air Command Staff College early, thank God, because it was kind of a year to decompress and catch my breath, spend a little bit of time with my wife, and did that in Montgomery, Alabama. At the end of that, well, about halfway through, I found out I was selected. I applied for the Advanced Studies group. A lot of people know about some of the school SAS, SAMS, and SAW, and I was selected to go to SAW, the School of Advanced Warfighting with the Marines. That's a second year of study. It's a very focused study. Air Command Staff College has 600 students. SAW has 24 students. In fact, you read 273 books in 1 year. It
Wow.
was an amazing academic experience. They do staff rides, and when I say staff ride, they get on the commandant's jet, and we go to Europe for 3 weeks. And we did Bellawood, we did Normandy for 5 days with a different, each beach, a full day with somebody who'd written a PhD dissertation on what happened at that battle spot. And they would have a student present for an hour, and then they'd have the PhD come in and clean up all your mistakes. and get to visit, all these incredible sites that, the crossing of River Rapido. We got to spend time with the French survivors of Dien Bien Phu. In the spring, we went over to Vietnam, did the same thing over there. So it was just a fantastic school. It was a lot of work. Wasn't quite as much work as weapons school. I'll tell one quick story though about with the Marines. I kind of bit into a little bit of, oh, it's the Marines. How tough could it be? And they would assign blocks of reading, typically around 400 pages, and we had to read about Napoleon. And when I got there to do the discussion, you would spend a full day reading, and then you'd have a 2-hour seminar at what happened. And it was clear to me that the Marines, as part of their normal PME, had read the 400 pages before and the 400 pages after the 400 pages you were supposed to read. And they knew it like the back of their hand because there were only 16 Marine officers in the class, and it was the top 16 Marines in the United States Marine Corps. So I'm like, uh-oh, I am going to have to swim a lot faster to keep up with these guys. So tremendous experience. I did that. Thought I was going to be all fat, dumb, and happy. Had an assignment lined up that changed at the last minute. And they said, hey, you're going to the Pentagon. I worked, I won't spend a lot of time there, but I worked in an advanced strategy cell for a while, future concepts and transformation, looking at things that were happening out in the future. And then one day my boss pulled me in and said, hey, get your resume together and bring your blues tomorrow. I'm like, why? And she said, well, you volunteered to be the Deputy Chief of Staff's exec. And I'm like, no, I did not. That is not a pain that I want. And she's like, well, you're going. So I went up to the office. I sat down, and it was Gerald Woody. I knew him. He had been the Air Warfare Center commander when I was an instructor. I knew who he was. I briefed him a couple times. And I sit down at his desk, and he's like, hey, Buck, good to see you. So why do you want to be my exec? And I said, I don't. He just started laughing. He's like, what? And I said, I am not exec material. Look at me. And look, I'm doing good work down there. Half the people are leaving. I need to be down there for continuity. And he just laughed. I guess nobody else had been honest. They all, oh, yeah, I love the experience. And I said, no. So he goes, okay, you start on Monday. I'm like, that lesson learned, don't be honest when it comes to jobs like that. So that turned into another memorable work experience, getting up at 4:45 every morning, racing to the Pentagon, getting home at about 9 o'clock at night. Our office, an E-ring office, was a skiff. He didn't know the combo to the door. He didn't know how to turn the alarm off. So I had to get there every morning before he did, unlock everything. And on the E-ring, the president's daily brief comes around in this black binder. It's all the top secret SCI stuff that's happened overnight. And he didn't want to read it. He wanted me to read the whole book and then just fill him in on the high points. So, I would get to the office at about between 5:15 and 5:30, get the black book, scream through it, make the coffee, line up all the stat packages, and then he'd walk in and, do his thing. So it was a very interesting assignment. Get back to the weapons school, do the DO gig, and then into the commander's seat. And then I told you in the last episode how I thought I'd been fired leaving that job and how that worked out. So that's kind of the high points of standing up weapons school. I'm sure I'm leaving a lot out. It continues to this day. I've been a guest speaker at graduations. Some of those guys today are so much better than we ever were. I mean, they've totally professionalized the process, and I couldn't be more proud of them. When I speak to the graduating classes, I spoke at the 20th anniversary. What I always tell them, a couple things. One of the most important things is when you come out of weapons school, you have been running a marathon at a sprinter's pace for 6 months, and you are jazzed up because the United States Air Force has invested millions of dollars into, the less than 200 people that get to go through the class. And you come out of there, your hair's on fire, and you want to fix everything at once. And you can't. Pick your battles, regulate your time, because not everybody wants to run as hard as you do. And to be effective, you're just going to have to regulate yourself. And the other thing I tell them is, as a weapons officer, it is very easy to feel good about yourself if that's what you want to do. We are kind of charged with finding that next bright and shiny penny out in the squadron that you think could be a patch, mentor them, guide them. And when you do that, you've normally found a guy or a girl who's just eaten up the program. They're already doing superb, and you can, give them a few other cues on the margins, and they're going to do fine. And you can slap yourself on the back and say, "Yeah, look what I did." That's not being a weapons officer in my mind. Being a weapons officer is finding the kid that's struggling and finding a way to get through to him or her to make them combat effective. Um, Certainly won't say the person's name, but worked with a kid who did that. Um, Going through weapons school, he struggled, really struggled, and to the point where um, all of my instructors wanted to wash him out, and I said no. I said he is worthy of the time, and they got pretty testy with me. They would push back in private, which I encouraged them to do. Flash forward, he graduated. He went into another platform and turned out to be one of the best weapons officers the command has ever had, hands down. So if you're not worried about who gets the credit or trying to make yourself feel good, if you want to roll up your sleeves and do the good hard work, you can really make a difference as a patch. And that's professionally, that's where I think I had probably my most success, was mentoring some of the people that might not have been bright and shiny petties, and giving them that extra piece of myself. Finishing that, I did talk about getting ready to go off to, how I thought I'd been fired, but I'll tell you, I learned good things and bad things all the way up until my last day of command. There was a point where, as an instructor, I flew a sortie I shouldn't have flown. Unfortunately, my wife had had a miscarriage earlier in the day. It was her third miscarriage in a couple of months. She was always a trooper about it. She's like, "No, I'm fine, I'm fine." And I knew she wasn't fine. And she's like, "No, just go fly." And I flew the sortie, and at the end of the sortie, we had finished all of our objectives. I flew like crap. But I had a student, and the student needed a couple approaches or something for currency. And I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Look, I really need these approaches, sir." And I just cut him off. And I cut him off in a very unprofessional manner. And we landed, and I had pulled him aside. I have since, years later, I've talked to him again and said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said it like that. I should not have been on that plane that night. I should have just been at home with my wife." But again, that's that type A, always trying to push through and do things. So that was the good and the bad of weapons school. You still learned lessons throughout all of your career, even having been a patch, 25 years right now. I still learn something every day, or every time I go fly my Cirrus, I still learn something. So I'll kind of cut right there on weapons school. I don't know if you have any questions.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, go ahead, and then we'll transition over to combat. Go ahead. Here it comes.
You could take a drink now.
Thank you.
That was fascinating. No, really. I have lots of questions. I think the one question, if I had to pick one, is I wanted to ask about the individual that slow clapped you, and that is now 3-star and is teaching cadets. I'm curious to know how that kind of person prospers. How do they get far in the Air Force? What are the redeeming qualities of that individual that mean that he or she is suited to that to the role of leading the nation's future warriors?
In my humble opinion, he has no redeeming qualities. Going through the process, when he was a wing commander, there were IG complaints against him. There was an IG complaint, too, that I know of from when he was deployed. And at one point, the AFSOC commander pulled me aside and said, "Hey, what do you know about this?" And I said, "Well, here's what I've seen. I've seen him make the wing secretary cry. I've seen him berate people. If the Air Force is serious about caustic leaders, he should be gone." And what he basically said to me was, "Well, some people are too far along to fail." And what he meant by that is AFSOC, always, it goes back to the comment I made before when they were 23rd Air Force. They always felt like the little redheaded stepchild that was constantly abused. And they were determined to make AFSOC general officers at all costs. And it really came from the MH-53, the Pavlo community, who had professionalized it. Like I said, they had a number. Everybody knew exactly where they stood. They put them in all the key jobs and made sure it happened. Well, this guy had been promoted two below lieutenant colonel and two below to colonel. So he's four below the zone, marching down his path. And if they can that guy, then they have wasted that opportunity. And that's exactly what that very senior officer was saying to me. And I was saying, but the damage that is being done by this one person, the careers that he has ruined. I actually saw there's another podcast. I just happened to see a short on it yesterday. People are talking about the story where basically he was, as an ops group commander, flying a CV-22, and he flew it into the trees, poked a hole in the side of the airplane, and then he Q3'd the entire crew for letting him do it.
Really?
And everybody on that podcast is like, how does this happen? And I'm like, exactly. How does it happen? So yeah, it's sad to see that. I certainly don't denigrate all Air Force general officers. I know a lot of them, just fantastic humans that are out there today. I think of like Gumby Schneider, who is the PACAF commander. We were weapons school instructors together. One of the most thoughtful, honest, smart mentoring officers I've ever met. I knew Bob Aran when he was the commandant, and then worked his way up to be ACC commander and Global Strike Command. Those are really smart, powerful general officers that were trying to do good. But sometimes some of these people leak through. It's all over the internet how, people look at that as an example of what's wrong with the Air Force. So
just sticking with AFSOC then as an entity with its own culture, because PACAF, USAFE, ACC, they're all going to have their own issues with, some communities stronger than others and individuals and personalities that are good and not so good. I'm curious, and this is a little bit of a divergence because I do want to talk about combat, but it's a bit of a divergence, but I'm curious to understand your view then on the culture in AFSOC. You've talked about the rivalry between different gunship communities. You talked about the MC-130 community. Has that resolved? Are those things now a thing of the past? Is it on a happy path? What does it look like?
I believe so. And one of the biggest things that happened was they have, if you will, homogenized the gunship fleet. There's no more AC-130H, AC-130U, AC-130W. It's all AC-130J. And with that, now there will be cross-flow between all the squadrons and all of the bases. There's different blocks of those airplanes that require a little bit of training, but in essence, they're all the same. So that natural flow will help stop all that tribalism that existed before. The Pavlos are gone. Their legacy continues on, if you will, in the CV-22 community. The current commander was a Pavlo guy and a CV-22 guy, Mike Conley. Great American, another great officer. I think the world of him. He's doing fantastic things for AFSOC, and I have not seen any of that tribalism flowing out of anything that he has done. On the MC-130 side, things are a little bit in flux. They have the MC-130J, but what they've been trying to do is replace the Talon 2. That was the one that could do terrain following with the big radar. So they have a program right now where they're putting that on some of the MC-130s. So you will have probably a little bit of tribalism, if you will, that you'll have some penetrating tankers and you'll probably have some non-penetrating tankers, but it won't be, what it was in prior days. So I'm glad that tribalism has changed, especially within the gunship community, because it did so much damage over the years. Even when they stood up the AC-130W very quickly, after Afghanistan and OIF, the President Bush actually came down to Hurlburt. We did this huge flying exercise demonstrating to the president and all the general officers what AFSOC could really do. And an outflow of that was to get 4 more gunships, which was great, except they said they have to be AC-130Us. And everybody's like, no, give us the money so we can start developing the next generation. But instead, they went and found AMC gave up 4 H model tails. They harvested those. They had to go acquire old mission computers and stuff because the U model was 20 something years old at that point, and then build these new U models. Um, so they had 17 U models. We had eight H models, but even that wasn't enough gunships for what was going on. So AFSOC had never had, when you started delineating squadrons with PAA, a lot of the plane nose guys will know what that means. You may have 24 airplanes in the squadron, but this many of them are combat coded. There's always one or two that are going to be in depot or can status, and then you're going to have some that are assigned to training or test. We never had those delineations. So after they did a study, they said, hey, AFSOC needs some clear birds, combat loss replacement airplanes, because they had crashed 4 MC-130s during the war. And again, they got 10, they harvested 10 more airframes from Air Mobility Command. Initially, they were going to be set up to be MC-130s, but very quickly the decision was made, no, we're going to turn them into a gunship. It's going to be a different version of the gunship in that it's going to have a 30 millimeter, the one that I had tested early on, and then it's going to have the common launch tube that I have over here over my shoulder with a variety of laser guided munitions that they can employ out of that. Those whiskey gunships later modified to add a 105 to them. But when they did that, you basically had three different types of gunships and three different gunship squadrons. And there wasn't a whole lot of crossflow between them. That's what fed into that tribalism. It's for the most part, it's gone now.
Can I ask you a little bit about working with, do you call them customers or operators, working with the Special Forces teams, and how they feed into the WIC experience? So, I know that you are an AFSOC, so you're in AFSOC, so you are Special Operations. When you're doing WIC, are you dividing your time between practicing, I don't know, what I might call conventional things like pounding some targets without there being special operations presence, or are there always going to be special operators on the ground coordinating with you? And if not, then is there a portion of the weapons school experience where those guys come in and they work with you on the NLS ranges and you do more advanced things?
Yeah, the weapons school in the phases we had, as I mentioned, we had the weapons phase, we had close air support phase. A lot of our training was focused on the basic building blocks of what we did as a gunship. When it came time to operate, working with other folks like some of the, Delta SEALs or whatever, we actually added an exercise into our syllabus that happened before mission employment phase, and it was called SOFX. And that was another 2-week war that would happen at Hurlburt. And we would employ the assets in a lot of those traditional AFSOC missions that I talked about before. We're going to seize an airfield. We're going to go hit an objective, grab something, grab someone, pull them out. And how do we go through the mechanics of doing that? Just as a natural state of that type of training, we were able to get a lot of those tiered units to come in and be a part of our syllabus. In particular, the Green Berets always responded. We had, there's actually a unit here, active duty, that's on the north side of Eglin, and then there was a reserve special forces group that commonly played with us. In fact, they would go to Nellis with us. But we would have this big exercise, and it became so popular that other WICs started coming to us, and they wrote it into their syllabus, including the Space WIC, of all people. And they wanted to come in and go through the steps, the muscle memory of doing integration to support our operations through some of the special capabilities that they bring. The A-10s ended up showing up, and they were with us every year to do SOFX. So yeah, we didn't work with just the Special Forces folks. We got to work with some of the other WICs and practice a very SOF-centric, focused battle that went on. Interestingly, when we got out to mission employment phase, that thread carried over, and one of the sorties in ME was very focused on special ops to the point where we would seize Tonopah. And we would conduct, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I will never forget, again, it was working, we just kind of became everybody's sweetheart there for a while. And everybody wanted to see what SOF was doing. And I think it was unfair to some of the other wicks at times because we got so much attention, but it paid off. There's a trophy they give out every year, an award called the Reisner Award, and it goes to the top weapons officer each year in the United States Air Force. And it's based on the person that graduated the year before. What have they done since they graduated? And yeah, my squadron won it 2 years in a row. I don't know that that's ever happened before. And it was really because of the mission sets. It wasn't somebody that was an instructor in my squadron. It was somebody that had graduated in my squadron 2 years in a row. I can't talk about the missions because they're both very classified, but both of them went and did things of very national importance. And that really got up a lot of attention to the point where on the ME sortie, when we were seizing Tonopah, I got a note and he said, it was from the commandant. He said, "Hey, come on in. We're going to have all this help, for this sortie." And it turned out it was the PA&E director, which is now OSD Cape, the vice chief of staff, General Deptula, who was the A3 or A2 at the time, and a whole host of other general officers. And I forget this guy's name. I've got it written down somewhere. He was a younger guy. He was a former Green Beret, as I recall, and he ended up as a special advisor to Don Rumsfeld when he was SecDef. And this guy ended up as, I think, a 3-star SES. But he was on the plane with us. So I'm the escort. And as we're going to seize Tonopah, the first thing, the gunships go in, do their magic. And I'm on the MC-130 with all the DVs. We're doing a low level. It is winter. It is just bumpy as hell with all the winds. Everybody's getting sick. I'll never forget watching General Deptula puke out of the back of the airplane as we went across Tonopah with the door open, and the soft guys are jumping and throwing their stuff. They have these little dirt bikes that they use when they go out so they can race up and down the runway to clear it, set up beacon lights or whatever if they need to. But all of these folks were on board with us when we went and, took down the airfield. And we landed. They got in their little DV van and drove around while, the soft guys did some stuff. And then the C-17s came in, and I marched them all on the C-17, and we flew all the DVs out. But those types of things, we got quite a bit of exposure on some of the sorties. So we got to play with the other special operators, but we got to play with pretty much everybody in the weapons school as well.
You described that mission where you had skirted the box and then found that you were on your own, and then you got bounced by those two F-16s. You also talked about how a big part of weapons school is learning to integrate with other platforms. So you obviously have maybe it's a mischaracterization, but there's a bubble that you guys kind of live in because you're doing your own thing. Those guys are going to go and kick the door down in a conventional war type situation. Those 4.5 5th gen fighters are going to do that. Did you work with them then much? Did you? So did you get to a point, for example, where you would be able to talk directly to some F-15s or F-16s and that they would protect you? How did that work? Was that already something that existed? Was it new?
Yeah, it was new, and it was a direct outflow of weapons school, going through a lot of, the missions are planned by the students, and the students, you're sitting in Core 1 with F-15 students, with F-16 students, Strike Eagle, Space. Everybody is all in the same room, and you're living through that same misery, so it builds a camaraderie. And when it came time to planning those sorties, we planned in these very large rooms, and all of the instructors from the other WICs were very big on driving that integration and discussion, because we were giving them very difficult tasks to accomplish. And we had a mantra, the mantra was punish student mistakes. And so we forced them to go, the extra effort to find out how to do that integration. Many a night, standing there with the light grade guys, some of the 5th gen guys, talking about the timing, how they were going to do an OCA sweep to clear the airspace, how long they could keep it sanitized for us, the CJs, how many harms they had, where their orbits were going to be, what type of orbit. So we knew what the coverage was, the ellipse, the EC-130. I mean, we were down to very exact details to conduct these very high-end missions. And the other thing that we did that I insisted from my instructors on the soft side was bring those folks into our world. They have a TSSCI just like we do. I get the Eagle guys don't want us to see their tapes. I never had anything that I said they can't see. They can see all of it. If maybe some of the tier operators that I might operate with, but even then, I could have found a way, I guess. But there was never anything I said they can't see, and I want them to understand. And I want them to understand how important it is the mission that we're executing. Usually, it is a national level importance mission. There were missions that I flew when I had a piece of paper with my chain of command and ROE from the president. I knew, okay, it didn't get higher than that. This is what we have to do. So bringing those folks in to understand, great learning took place, and especially in the mid 2000s, when Iraq and Afghanistan had just got totally ugly with all the IEDs and things that were going on. You had a fighting season that would ramp up, ramp down, and the endless deployments. My squadron that I flew with, they were gone continuously, I think, for 14 years. They had an airplane or two in theater for 14 years. That's a pretty long time. There was only 8 H model gunships, and at least 2 of them were gone for 14 years in that theater. So a lot came out of that. Um, and I'll kind of segue for just a second. Some of it was negative learning, not with the weapons school, but some of those long-term deployments because we gave up some of our core capabilities, seizing an airfield. We didn't practice it because we were out there manhunting every night, killing people. And we got very good at running a cast stack. We got very good at hitting an objective, dealing with squirters, exploiting it, and then developing tactics that we would immediately exploit what we had just done and run to the next target as quickly as possible to keep our OODA loop moving faster than the threat and expand and, identify those networks to take them down.
One of the things we haven't really talked about is sort of dates. So you, what year do you finish as the squadron commander at the weapons school? Go to the schools, and then what year do you come out of schools and back into the into AFSOC?
Yeah, I went off to Air Command and Staff College in 2003. So 3.5 years prior to that, all doing weapons school stuff. I came back to the weapons school in November of 2006 and stayed until May of 2009. So all that's overlapping with the conflict that's going on, obviously in Afghanistan and Iraq. There's kind of a go ahead.
Yeah, just a really quick question on that then. So you talked earlier about how the community, your community, is flying combat all the time, and how all these guys have DFCs. You are, for want of a better word, stuck then in the continental United States at Nellis. You're not getting combat, but you're running the weapons school. Quick question on that then. Does that create a disconnect? How are you making sure that you're communicating with the guys that are going to combat and experiencing the things that you're actually teaching?
Because we are going to combat. We're a part of that deployment cycle. Every cycle, we would send weapons officers out of the schoolhouse. I would take it out of Hind, and they would do deployments. I did a deployment as a weapons school instructor. So that's how we stayed relevant. The community was just too small to say this group of very experienced instructors aren't going to go fight. So we worked hand in hand with Air Combat Command, with Air Force Special Operations Command. There was no pushback on that at all. It was like, yeah, we got to get these guys in the fight. And we stayed in the fight all the time.
I'm with you. Okay, I misunderstood that then. Okay. So what was your first combat deployment, or when was your first combat deployment?
We finished weapons school in 2001, so went over right after that. But let me back up just a little bit, because it's kind of a good stage setter, if you will. Before 9/11, and I think I talked about it previously, where the only other recent combat was Kosovo. Prior to that, we were doing no-fly missions in Bosnia. The squadron was endlessly deployed to Brindisi, Italy, flying combat missions, no-fly zone, and stuff like that. When that ended, everybody thought, oh my gosh, peace has broken out around the world. We're never going to get to shoot again. And then Kosovo happened, and as I mentioned, the requirement was written for the U models, so they go over and shoot. And the H models, the Spectre guys, all stay home, and now we're all moping around like, oh man, this is it. Peace. What do we do here? So 9/11 kind of happens, and we're thrust right back into it. But in that calming dead period, if you were, a couple of key things that happened. We had sort of reset on doing those basic missions that I had talked about, airfield seizure and some of those things. But another thing happened even as late as 2002, and it was probably part of that institutional resistance to AFSOC. We had an AFSOC commander that was a plain nose guy. And that didn't set well with a lot of people, and he did himself no favors. And I'll give you the perfect example. Each command typically puts out a safety magazine every couple of months. And when you open it up, usually inside the front cover is a picture of the commander and his or her safety words for whatever period of the magazine was. And they're typically posing in front of an airplane. And in AFSOC, it was always a gunship, a Pavlo, or a Talon. Inside the front cover of the AFSOC safety magazine, he posed with an F-15C. And that sent a very clear message to everybody in the command about where we stood. So all of those things were an amalgam leading up to, getting back into combat and the fast and furious nature that it was. So let me kind of talk about the early days in combat. And I am certainly not the end all be all. I think everybody had a different experience. Everybody processes it differently. And I'll actually be open and honest here in a little bit and talk about some of that, how you process it. But in the early days, it was very much the wild, wild west. Here's your kill container. Go shoot anything that moves. Any vehicle, kill it. And those were very loose ROE that very quickly tapered off because that's just not sustainable, especially when you're trying to make friends with a population. You don't go shoot everything. But while the Taliban were in control and Al Qaeda was there, go shoot anything. And a lot of the stuff that we found, it wasn't with the sensors. The sensors were great, but they're typically it's like a soda straw view of the world. And the pilots up front and the other scanners with your NVGs, you have a much bigger field of view, field of regard, and just the natural movement that the human eye can detect. A lot of times I would look out there and see a Toyota 4Runner hauling ass across the desert. And went, that's our target. And then you go through the whole litany of putting them in a position, flying the airplane, putting it sort of on the left side, talking a sensor on, setting up your geometry, and then talking about how you were going to engage. As the war went on years and years, it became less about just going to kill anything and more about running the cast stack, ISR, and conducting hits as the teams, were out there doing their mission sets. So there were ODAs and special forces all around the country. Some nights we would take off on missions, and our sole mission was to just go check each one of the safe houses and spend an hour overhead. And if it gave them a breather to where they could get some sleep and relax, knowing that a gunship was overhead, so be it, man. I'll fly, I'll circle all night if that's what's needed. A lot of times we'd get to one objective and JTAC would have a scan, especially when we were on the border with Pakistan, because a lot of stuff was coming in and out of the border and things like that. But then there were missions that sort of just happened. There were missions that evolved over time. And I'll tell you about a very crazy mission that I flew, just the very nature of it and how it flowed out that night. I was getting ready. I believe I was just going to be an airborne alert. So my mission was, again, just to go cycle around these safe houses and scan some areas. And our airplanes on the ramp at Karshi Canada, we flew out of K2, a long ramp, and the airplanes were actually backed up against this sloping cement. And a lot of the enlisted guys would go out before the flight to pre-flight. The engineer and the loadmaster would pre-flight, and then the gunners would go out to make sure all that the munitions were uploaded, and they would put things where they wanted it. If we had proximity rounds, or they would preset fuses, they wanted to have their nest built properly, if you were. But at the end, you'd see them sitting towards there on the back of the ramp, on that slope piece of cement. And I always had this process that I went through when I got to the airplane. It wasn't that I didn't trust the crew chiefs, but I always did a walk around. But more than anything, it was mentally me getting my mind in the game because I had to manage all of this and I wanted to review the game plan. So I would slowly walk around the plane. And I got to the nose of the airplane and I happened to look left, and that was looking down the ramp where everybody came in. And I saw the mission commander cut through the little opening in the Jersey barriers, and he was running at me at a dead sprint. I'm like, okay, this isn't good. I looked at the back of the airplane, everybody's sitting out there, and I'm like, get on the plane now, let's spin it up. And to the point where there's a process, usually you'll start one engine at a time, but you can gang load and start multiple engines, and that's what we did. We had everything going. I just had a feeling something was really bad. So I'm in the seat, we're gang loading. I haven't even strapped in, and we've got engines spinning. He comes up through the back of the airplane, up on the flight deck. He leans over to me while I'm starting engines, and he hands me a yellow sticky, and he says, "Hey, Craig, this team just got ambushed. They're in really bad shape. They're being chased. Here's a frequency. Take off, head north, figure it out."
Wow.
It's like, okay, this is the start of a great mission. So sure enough, we get spun up, we take off, we have to cross the Hindu Kush, and the frequency they gave was it was a SATCOM frequency. And back in the early days, they still had some of the SATCOM where the guys had to stop and point the antenna to make sure they had the right signal. Check in with this guy, and I'm still, like 200 miles out, and I can hear the urgency in his voice. I can hear him screaming at the other people, and I can hear gunshots in the background. And I'm like, okay, we are firewalled, getting there as fast as we can. And I'm trying to build a picture of what's going on, but the weather's really bad there as well. There had been a dust storm, and there was a lot of nasty weather in the area. So they had put out a call, in theater, anybody else that was airborne, and the only person or the only other platform that was reasonably close was the B-52. And I'm listening to the communication between the guy on the ground and the B-52. And in short, the B-52 could not see the ground. And they're giving a target description. We had PFPS, which is the flight planning software that's running on a laptop with a GPS puck receiver. So you have your crude moving map, but I always carried a hard map as well, just old school. And I'd do the finger distances, range and bearing. And I was looking at where they were at, and I could hear the conversation with the B-52. And I think I talked about this before, the difference between the U's and the H's. The H model pilots were very good at building a mental picture because we didn't have all the fancy displays. And I'm listening to them call the range and bearing, and I'm looking at my map, and I'm like, this is not right. And they were basically, the ground party had been run down a little valley, and their only escape was now go up this mountain. And where they thought they were taking fire from, they were taking it from 4 directions, but one of the direction they gave the range and bearing, and I looked on my map, and there was a little village there. And the conversation was progressing to the point where they were going to pitch a GBU-31 into that village. And I'm just like, I cannot let this happen. I don't want to, just stop the whole thing here, but I've got to find a way to convince them that I'm right, because I knew I was right. So I got on the radio with the B-52 and I lied. And I said, I don't want you to drop that bomb through my altitude. I'm about to roll in over the target. And they didn't. I was still 40 miles away. So it took me a little while to get over there. Got over the target, and our ROE, I think I talked about it before, we had a different boss every night on the ATO. Usually I worked for a Joint Special Operations Forces commander. If there was excess air power that the soft commander didn't need, he or she would delineate it back over to the CFAC to use at their whim. Rarely did that happen. On this particular night, I was working for a 1-star soft commander. That was my chain of command, not the 3-star CFAC. And the 3-star CFAC rules was nobody goes below 10,000 feet AGL. They didn't want to risk somebody, ground fire or whatever else, AAA. Well, I'm overhead the target and I can't see anything because I'm in the weather. And now I've got direct radio comms, UHF with these guys, and they are screaming and they are in a horrible, horrible gunfight. So I'm like, okay, guys, we got no choice. I need extra scanner. Everybody be on the alert. I'm going to start taking this down. We're going to get right to the bottom of the clouds, and then we're going to figure this shit out. So start dropping down. I won't say the altitudes, but broke out of the clouds. Was that we were able to slave to the rough area where we thought the friendlies were. Started looking back, we were chasing some of the tracers back to their point of origin. And about a minute later, one of my guys screams, there was a code word. I don't even know if it's classified anymore, so I won't say it, but there was a code word we would delineate that a missile threat was in the air, telling everybody they had now do certain functions on board the airplane. I had to do my threat reaction. We had to do other things. The person says that, and the way the situation typically plays out is as soon as you say that word, they will start putting flares out. Scanners are looking, saying flares away. Whoever sees the threat, say, I've got the threat, 6 o'clock, it's coming. It bit off on the second set of flares, threats down, continue. And that's how this whole cacophony of events happened. I thought, okay, great. And about 0.69 seconds later, my other scanner and his voice cracked when he said it. And part of the language, but he said, holy shit, here comes another one. And there was something different about this one. We knew that they would shoot some of the older SA-7s to get us to react. And then they had probably a couple of hidden gem special, newer systems that they would employ. And I'm pretty sure that's what this one was. And this one, everything, temporal distortion, everything slowed down for me. It was readily apparent that this missile was a little bit different. And all I would hear them say was, flares away, it's still coming. Flares away, it's still coming. Now, this probably only lasted 4 seconds. I remember, I think he had actually called it at 7 o'clock. And for some reason, where I was in the orbit, I happened to look over for a second, and all I could see was my co-pilot, the lights of the NVGs on his eyes, and his eyes were like this. And he's like, we're about to get hit. I saw the missile coming up. The missile went past and then went above us. And luckily, we didn't get hit. The good part of the story was there's a smoke trail going right back down to the ground. And I knew exactly where that manpad came from. And I rolled in and stuck a couple 105s there. And, he was not a threat anymore. It turned out that there were 4 definite groups of bad guys approaching these guys. And we were able to identify all of those and destroy all 4 groups of the people. That led me, I'll kind of talk about it later here. I'll talk about some other missions here in a couple minutes, but at the end of that engagement or that mission, I had killed 32 people in 8 minutes. And it's not just the American way of war, it's something about air power. We count. I mean, look, the picture that you have up behind you, each one of those little figures is 10 people killed. There's buildings hit, there's vehicles up there. But, you go back to World War I, World War II, we count an ace. Oh my gosh, we celebrate an ace with 5 kills. Oops, there goes that earbud again. So it just became natural for everybody to count in our tents. They had a painting or a drawing of each crew, and they would put the kill markings. And inside of me, something changed to where I'm like, I don't need to count. I just don't. I had no regrets. They were very bad people. They were trying to do horrible things to Americans and our coalition partners. But at the end of the day, it was still somebody's father, brother, son, uncle, cousin, whatever. And I didn't need the validation of celebrating that I'd killed them to make me feel better. I just felt better that I had accomplished my mission. So I stopped counting. And that was just personally how I processed and dealt with it. Other people counted. I didn't bother me. You do whatever you have to do. But at the end of that mission, that put my count up into the hundreds. And I just thought, I don't need to do this anymore. And I flew many, many missions after that. And, I don't know what the total is, but it doesn't matter to me. My total is I did my job. I brought every single person on my crew back, and I never lost a person on the ground. That's my count.
But what did the experience then of going below the cloud base and then getting shot at twice? What did that do to your psyche, to your appetite for risk, to your weapons school mind?
There's something different that happens, and that's that your fangs come out, especially when somebody shoots at you. Viscerally, it does something inside of you to where I am going to get this guy. But within the gunship community, it is beaten into us, not just in weapons school, just day one of training, that we're not going to leave the guys on the ground. We're going to do everything humanly possible to save them. So that's what was at the forefront of my mind. I was not, I had run some risk calculation in my head. I don't want to say the altitudes. Had descended to an altitude where I was still going to be able to get out a certain number of flares. I had just reduced the margin. And that was a risk I knew I could accept to save those guys on the ground.
What was the debrief like then? I mean, it's interesting you talking about counting the kills and that number rising significantly after that mission. When you sat down with the crew then and debriefed the mission, was it somber? Were people reflective about what had happened? What is your response and the response of the crew to that situation?
It was interesting. People had different reactions. A lot of people celebrated it, especially a new guy or girl that came in the squadron. One of their first missions, they were jazzed up, just the adrenaline flow. There was, especially through 2003, a feeling of payback, for what had happened in 2001. I mean, there were all kinds of stuff that we had chalked onto the projectiles, New York Fire Department, New York Police Department, all of those things. So that flavor, if you will, existed in the squadron. It's not like they were sitting around saying, "Oh yeah, we did this and did that to this guy and that guy," but they did celebrate, and there was a bit of a competition, and it manifested itself in a very odd way, well, in a sad way, with one guy. Very briefly, uh, there was a gentleman, certainly won't say his name, who flew a lot of missions, and it just seemed he was sometimes flying with different crews, and it seemed like every mission he flew on, there were a lot of kills. And he was a sensor operator. And there was a point on one of those deployments where he was on the other crew for a reason. We had to send the aircraft commander of that crew home. And the boss came to me and said, "Hey, Craig, you're going to fly both crews until I get a replacement over here." And I'm like, okay. And that crew was very dysfunctional. They were somewhat broken. Um, and I was trying to help rebuild them, but you could still tell anytime I flew with them, it was a big kill mission, and this guy was on the mission. And the pace at which we were working attitude. In fact, when I was flying both of those, I flew 80 combat hours in 8 days. That's a lot. It is a lot that just drains you. And it's even worse in the gunship because it's unpressurized. You're on the hose the whole time. So it is just sucking all the moisture out of you. We all had these permanent red dents on our nose from the mask that we were wearing, for 10 hours every night. I've got 4 hours on the front side of that. I've got 4 hours of debrief. I'm supposed to have 12 hours. I don't. After my debrief, I go back, grab a bite to eat, crash, get up and do it again. And on the 9th day when I showed up, I was a very whipped pony. And the boss looked at me and he's like, "Yeah, no, not today. Go back and sleep." And I think I slept for like 20 hours. But that was my personal record, 80 combat hours in 8 days. But anyway, so flash forward a bit. I fly both crews. It comes time to rotate home. And I had a rule with my crew, having done a couple deployments, the reintegration when you get home can be a challenge. And it's very, I talked about this in the light attack with the RPA guys, how they don't have that decompression time. We did. Leaving theater, we would typically fly to Tbilisi, Georgia, and then we'd go to Turkey. and have a day or two to decompress before we caught the rotator home to Baltimore and then a commercial flight or C-130 back home. So it was a 4 or 5 day process to get home. And anytime I came back from a deployment, I would wait 24 hours and then I would call each person on my crew. How are you? Do you need anything? Is everything okay at home? Because, in the spouse's defense, he or she has been taking care of everything. And now this guy just rolls in and he's, trying to change everything. And plus he's just gone through some very traumatic events. So I would always try to take care of my people. So we leave. I've got both crews. I think they did get another aircraft commander over and he flew with them 2 or 3 times and then we all went home. So we're sitting in Turkey and I'm not really paying that much attention, but this one guy that I mentioned before that had been on a lot of the missions with a lot of kills was so obliterated drunk that he was sitting on a picnic table and he had his butt on the table and his feet on the bench and he passed out and fell over forward and cut his head open. I thought, man, this person is, having a tough time. So we got home, we got back to the States and he had reintegrated. His family was there. I thought everything was fine. Well, what I didn't know was when he got back, his wife told him that she'd been having an affair. She wanted a divorce and she was taking his kids and leaving. And a short time later, he got a bottle of vodka. He drank it and he drove up on the range and he shot himself and killed himself. And that has stuck with me as a personal failure. He wasn't on my crew, but I flew their crew. Why didn't I call him? And I still don't know why. I should have known, but that is the impact that non-ending combat, killing people all the time, can have on the human psyche. Like I said, everybody processes it differently. Other people had no problem. They count. I had 780 kills. No big deal. Let's go. Let's get some more. Every person deals with it differently. I knew from my own humanity that I could not give up my humanity in the name of keeping score, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So on the flip side of that consideration, then you've got the customer, the operators you're working with. Are they calling up after an engagement when they've got back from whatever mission they're doing and talking to you? Are you getting to hear? It sounds like a strange thing to say, but the value of what it is you're doing. You're putting yourselves through this. You are taking the lives of others, but you're saving American and coalition lives. Are you hearing about that? Do you get feedback from them?
We do, and one of those interactions contributed to me not wanting to count anymore because there was a very popular series of commercials back then. Priceless. I don't know if you remember that. 2 tickets to the Super Bowl, $8,000, airfare, $500. So price, attending the Super Bowl, priceless.
Yeah.
Well, after that mission where I had dropped down below the weather, the team went back and took a bunch of pictures of the people that we had shot. And they packaged it up and they made a priceless commercial out of it. 50 rounds of 105, this much. This month, many rounds of 40 millimeter, 32 dead, bad people, priceless. And in their way, they were trying to say, thank you, you saved us. But to me, it was just yet another demonstration that everybody processes it differently. I didn't need to see that for my validation or whatever. So, we did talk to them. Let me tell you another event that happened and how I actually did get some feedback, some very pointed feedback on the success of the mission. And sometimes it's difficult to talk about, but I'll tell the story. So this mission actually starts about 3 weeks before the actual event. Things had kind of calmed down. We would do, I told you, those airborne missions cycling around. And anytime I went over to this one safe house in this one particular area, there would usually be a AAA piece or two that would pop out and shoot off a couple rounds at me. And then they'd scoot it back into their compound, into a building or something. And by the ROE, I'm not going to just start shooting into a building that I can't PID that it's a bad guy. But I noticed it was anytime I went to this one area. So I had been asked to go down to Bagram. We were having a fires conference. They were talking about the Intel folks were there. We had the one-star SOF commander. I think they had sent the deputy CFAC down, and they're talking about changing the ROE, but they're talking about what they think is going to be this resurgence in a certain area. And it was not the area where I kept getting shot at. So towards the end of the brief, I said, hey, by the way, what about this particular area? I'm not going to say where it was on the map. I said, every time I go over there, somebody lights me up. Well, I guess nobody else was going over there and they didn't know. And I was looking up at the front of the room and there was an '06 Intel guy and his nugget just immediately snapped right to me. And he said, this area? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay. He got up, he walked over, he talked to the deputy CFAC, and then the meeting ended and they both made a beeline to me. And it turned out that one of the very high-ranking guys, I think he's dead now, Berater, he was like the Taliban #2, the ops officer. He was from that particular area, and they thought that he was there, and they thought that those increased threat reactions were the enemy trying to keep us at bay somewhat. So they put on a very big planning process, started at that point. They asked me to go back 2 nights later. I did, trolled around, got shot at. They inserted a couple ODA teams up in the hills, and they were watching what was going on. And the ODA teams actually identified a bunch of fixed AAA sites that weren't engaging us, but they could see that they were there and they were set up in position to protect this one area. A lot of other intel things happen in the background I can't talk about, but the decision was made that they were going to conduct a hit on this target because they thought he was there. They called me, said, you're the airborne mission commander. You have 5 gunships. The CFAC is designate or approved pre-strike assault fires, and that the B-52 was going to make a pass, pitch out a bunch of GBU-31s on those fixed sites. And that was something they typically were not doing at that point in the conflict because of the ROE. They wanted to VID, PID, everything that was going on. But nope, they're going to come in, pitch their bombs. You can build the plans. We did a bunch of planning. I had 2 H model gunships. I was taking the center point. Basically, I was picking up the assault team. They were some tier guys, but they didn't want to do a helicopter assault. They wanted to come in on the ground with vehicles. So I was going to pick them up, escort them to the target area. I had another gunship sitting just outside. There was a little river right there. And then we had 3 U model gunships that flew in from Basira to cover this. And those folks had a very long haul. It was like 3.5 hours one way for them to get to Afghanistan from Basira. So we planned this whole mission for a couple of weeks. It comes time to execute the mission. I have a brief with the other gunship crew, and then I am going to go get on SIPRNet and something. We had another communication system and talk to the rest of the players. At that point, a contractor was working at K2 and cut the main comm lines coming into the base. So everything goes dark. I'm like, crap. I had one Iridium sat phone, and I am now using that trying to call around the theater with phone numbers that I don't know to talk to the other players. I managed to get a hold of gunships at Masira. They knew what was going on. We all took off and got to the Marshall area, got all the folks together, and the B-52, they were about to start their inbound run when a 4 ship of A-10s that were never in the plan show up. The CFAC is on the radio, and the CFAC changes the plan at the last minute and says the A-10s are in charge. I'm like, okay. And at that point, the lead A-10 broke, the flight lead. So I don't know if it was -2 or -3 takes over. And it was right about then that the B-52 had pitched off some of the GBU-31s. They were not able to get off all, so they did not pre-strike all of the AAA pieces as we had thought. And at that point, the A-10 is trying to do a roll call. And he's like, now, which target area were you going to go to? I'm like, no, you have no idea what's going on. I love the A-10 guys, but you guys were injected into this too late. You don't know the plan. I am the airborne mission commander, and I took charge. And I said, just get out of the way. So I go charging in there. I pick up the assault team, and I'm escorting them down the road to the compound, and the compound is lit up. There's gunfire everywhere. And as I start to roll in on orbit, a 23 millimeter in the center of the compound opens up on me, and it is very accurate fire, and it's just barely missing me. So I'm like, give me number 6 with a prox round. I want to throw an air bursting round down on top of that. I roll in, and as I do it, my CCIP and my PA go opposite directions at a mission computer failure. I'm like, okay, so my crew is scrambling. They switch mission computers, they find errors. I roll back in to shoot again, all kinds of errors. I can't shoot. I'm screaming, give me manual. I'm going to just shoot this guy manual. But there were a lot of other malfunctions on the airplane. And it took 2 or 3 minutes to try and sort that. We put down some manual rounds, and I roll back in. I said, okay, when you shoot manual, typically if you've done a tweak, you would want to know your deltas, your gun deltas. I would dial those into the HUD. You could change your azimuth and elevation to account for the gun error, and that would be your starting point to walk rounds on. So I roll in to shoot the AAA piece, and it was funny. My flight engineer, he had come out of his seat, which they would typically do, and he had this little step stool, and he would sit right beside me. As I'm looking through the HUD, he would be right there just scanning to see what's going on. He'd look over, scan the engines, and then he had his hand up above him because he would arm and safe the number 6 gun. When the guns called it gun ready, he would arm it to let us shoot. And all of a sudden, a stream of 23 millimeter went right past us. It was about 10 inches away. It just barely missed the cockpit and went off, and it went above, and it went off like popcorn. And man, he was just as cool as a cucumber. And I'm like, I got to be cool as a cucumber too. He goes, hey, boss. I'm like, yeah. He said, did you see that? I'm like, yep. He said, okay. And then we just went right back to it. So I roll in to kill this guy. And all of a sudden, I see a pop, a flash, and a smiley face on the ground. Now, let me show you what that looks like. Let me, I know I've got it here. This is not the actual, but this is what it would look like if you'll give me just a second. Okay, so again, the resolution is not great here. That's just, again, a function of the recorder, but we can see very clearly on the sensor what's happening. So you'll see all these folks running around on the ground, and there's a impact right up there. Let it go for a second. Okay. I don't know if you saw that. Here's the flash, and I'll rewind it just a hair. And I'll play again. You're going to see a flash or a boom, and then you're going to see what looks like a smiley face or a semicircle pattern on the ground. Okay. Boom, and there's that semicircle on the ground.
Yeah.
And what that is that's an air bursting 105. And I see that through the HUD with my NVGs, but I didn't shoot. I'm like, what? Wait a minute, what? And then a couple seconds later, another pop, flash, smiley face on the ground. And I'm like, holy crap. And I start looking around, and the other gunship had crossed the demarcation line and was shooting through me at the target on the ground. And my blood ran cold. I'm like, holy crap. Ceasefire, what the hell? Well, he had heard my navigator tell the ground party we were having a gun problem, and he said checking off for a second. When I said checking off, I was just checking my orbit off for a second to reset everything. He thought I was checking out of the area to deal with it, so he came charging in to kill the threat. I wish he would have said something to me about it. Might have made me feel a little better, but that was quite interesting. So lots of the rest of the night was just crazy. There's everybody shooting, wailing away. We realized everything on the airplane, both mission computers, both INSs are corrupted. I had actually taken my GPS out of my survival vest and put it up on the dash of the airplane trying to grab a signal. There was something else playing that night denying that signal, so we couldn't even do that. But a real funny event kind of happened right in the middle of it. And that was I had my fire control officer had played football at the University of Alabama. He was a defensive tackle. He was an All-American. He'd been drafted by the Dallas Cowboys, and he was a good old boy. And he had a bit of an accent. He always had a dip in his mouth. And then at altitude, he had an oxygen mask. And you take the accent, the dip, and the mask, and it could be very difficult to understand what he was saying. Some of the navigators, there's a private net between the nav, the fire control officer, and the booth. And I'd flown with navs who said, I don't know what he said. I just nod my head up and down. So things finally start to calm down. I get over to a quiet space. I'm like, all right, crew, we've lost, both mission computers, both INSs. So we've got to figure a couple of things out. And it got real quiet. And out of the quiet comes this voice, this very country voice with a dip of tobacco. How the hell we gonna get home? I'm like, all right, we'll figure it out. And what I ended up doing was I had the other gunship go to one of the AAA pieces that was burning, had him orbit, and then I found him with my NVGs, climbed up, and I got on his wing. And I spent the rest of the night on his wing just visually, and then flew all the way back to K2 on his wing. So we get back and we're thinking, man, that was crazy. And that mission immediately made the news, and in a negative way, to the point where both crews were grounded the next day. In fact, I think the U model crews were grounded as well. They wanted to review our tapes. So they made a copy of our tape and they said, take it up to the CFAC. The CFAC wants to see it. And they sent like one of our planners to carry it. I was told later the planner got to Germany. When he got to Germany, they diverted him and said, nope, go to DC. He went all the way to DC to the Pentagon with our tape. We get word that we're grounded. They send an investigation team over to Afghanistan as a 1-star, a bunch of 06s. I won't tell all of that story because I tend to get pretty angry about some of the people that were in the room and clearly had an agenda, other than to say we were actually at first denied JAG officers, denied any legal representation. And I told my crew, I said, don't say a word, don't go in there, don't even go say a word. That is your right. And basically they were saying that we had shot up a friendly location. So I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go into the room and see what this is all about. And, the minute it starts to bump up against any legal lines, I'm just going to say, okay, I don't have any further statements. I'd like a lawyer. And I think what they offered was we could talk to a JAG up in Europe somewhere on the phone. So, long and short of it is I go into the room. This 1-star who's a bomber background guy. He's a good cop. They've got some bad cops in the room, and one of them is this Navy JAG 06 who stands up and is immediately in my face yelling at me, do you understand, perjury and the implications? I'm like, yeah, sure. And then, of course, good cops like, oh, by that time I was a major. He's like, hey, Major Walker, we just want to get to the truth of what happened. So there was another pointy nose F6 pointy nose 06 ops group commander who was trying to steer the conversation that we had screwed up. And I guess he didn't realize I was a patch wearer. I don't know, maybe that would have made a difference in the beginning. It certainly did in a little bit, but he was feeding questions to somebody else on the board about AAA. And they kept trying to say, this, you weren't being shot at. This was just some celebratory AK-47 fire. And he fed the one question, well, how do you know it was 23 millimeter? And when he did that, because they were sitting way in the back of the room, I kind of turned sideways to get my water bottle. And when I did, I guess he saw my patch. And it was like a switch flipped in his head. And he physically reached over and tried to get the guy to stop from asking the rest of the question. And I just opened up, well, 23 millimeter. It's the smallest round of AAA that has a self-destruct function. I started reading off all the classified altitudes where it self-destructs and all of this. And, they're just like, oh, God. So good cop realizes that something's just not right. And he's like, Major, the long and short of it is we don't understand, because when we look at your tape, all we see is you just wailing on these people, and we don't see anything leading up to it. And they had a TV set up, and they had the tape paused, and they played it, and it's just mowing down all these bad guys. And I said, okay, can we rewind it to the beginning? And they rewinded. He goes, this is the beginning. And I said, that's not the beginning. And what happened was I had a brand new intelligence officer, first deployment. And when they said, make a copy of the tape, that person did not rewind the tape to the beginning. So fortunately for me, we were at our base. The tent where they were holding this inquiry was just outside our ops center. And I said, hey, can we send a runner over to the ops center, go into the safe? My tape is in there. And so they go get the original, and they plug it in, they rewind it to the beginning, and there you see this 23 millimeter. That's the first frame, just wailing away. You see the tracers coming up, you see everything. You can see the people loading the weapon on the ground, and the place just kind of went quiet. So I'm going to send a request to share. So the outflow of that mission kind of happens in two steps. And I hope I can tell this without getting too emotional. That deployment comes to an end. As I mentioned, we would go through Tbilisi, then into Turkey and go home. But we would usually fly out on a C-17 because we left our airplanes there. So I get on the C-17, we take off out of K2, we land in Bagram. When we land, an ODA gets on, and there is a mountain of a man on this ODA team. I mean, this dude is just massive. And we typically didn't wear all of our patches in our squadron patch or anything in country, but we were going home, so everybody put their patch on. And I think I had the gunship patch on my helmet bag. And that team, they came in and sat on the side of the C-17. They sat across from us. And I just looked up, and that dude, that giant soft dude, is looking at me, and he looks at my helmet bag and sees the patch, and then he's just like staring at me for like an hour. I'm like, what the hell? Is this guy going to kill me? So we get up to Turkey, and we're all walking in a line up to this area, had to check in process and all that. And this guy gets out of line, and he just makes a beeline, starts walking up to me. And he says, excuse me. He says, you fly gunships? I'm like, yeah. And he said, well, can you do me a favor? I'm like, yeah, anything. Just don't, stab me to death or whatever it is you're going to do. And he said, can you find out who the pilot was on a mission that occurred on this date? And he said, the guy saved my life. My wife's pregnant. I'm going home to see her. And without him, this wouldn't happen. And I looked at him, he looked at me, and something got in my eye and all of that. And that's when we both realized it was me. And that was the greatest payback I could have had for, any mission in Afghanistan. Then he gives me this bear hug, lifts me off the ground, every vertebrae in my back cracks. And, I pack up and I go home. The outflow of that mission just kind of stuck in my craw for a long time, some negative press around it. And nobody in our squadron thought we did anything wrong, but it's just like nobody was going to say anything about it. And it took 18 months. Yeah, 18 months. I get a call later, and it says, hey, you're being called up to a meeting. There's a formal event. So they actually want you to wear your mess dress. I'm like, that's kind of weird. But there was some kind of event in DC going on. It was a formal event, and this was going to be like a sideshow of it. And they said, we want you to be here at this appointed hour with your wife and all of that. And I'm like, okay, yeah, do the whole thing. And that turned into this. That was when I got my second DFC. And that was kind of it just felt like things had kind of come full circle at that point. It meant a lot. He was so personable, made me feel right at home, and kind of took a lot of the weight of that particular sortie off my shoulder for many years to come.
Did that DFC buck come from that mission then? So did it flipped? It went from you are potentially in trouble to you are, the nation is grateful to you.
Yep. Yeah. And all unbeknownst to me, I don't know the full story. I was told I was put in for something higher. I could care less. And that because of some of, the intricacies around it, that they thought, well, if they do a DFC, they could approve it at one level and it'd be nice and quiet and all of that. I really didn't care. I was just honored that, I got to get it in that manner.
Can I ask? You did say you don't want to get into too much of the detail because it makes you angry. Can I ask about the perspective then of the investigative team or whatever they're called, the people that came over? So they have only been given a portion of the tape, and the most critical portion has been kept from them, by a sort of inexperience or inaptitude or whatever you want to ascribe it to. Is there some expectation that if they see what they saw, that they would come down on a crew like a ton of bricks, or is your expectation actually that they would say, well, we need to see the whole tape before we start coming in and throwing stones?
First, it was always my perception that we had to prove we didn't do something wrong. Nobody ever immediately took our side. It was always, oh, you guys screwed up, and not that they never wanted to assume that we were absolute extreme professionals who executed to the utmost of our ability and were very thoughtful in what we did. It's funny because some of that continues to this day about my community. I won't, say names, but a previous AFSOC commander, when they were having a lot of the DEI stand downs, and I'm not talking politics at all, but when they were having those stand downs, he actually directed a stand down within the community, the gunship community, to reflect on the fact that they killed so many people, that they were stone cold killers.
Really?
And that he didn't come from our community, but that was his perception. And nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, the gunship community spends so much time. The worst thing in our mind would ever be fratricide, and we spend so much time to prevent that. And I told you that people count, but that it's not like there were posters around the squadron of, oh, we slayed this many people or whatever. That wasn't the case. Just some individual people did, but it was never a common theme in the squadron that we're just going to go kill whatever we see. It was quite the opposite. There were many times I didn't shoot because I didn't know. And if the only time I would push it beyond a limit is if I thought an American or a coalition partner was going to die if I didn't do something. And there were times I thought long and hard, especially doing like a danger close shoot. That is probably I was even more scared on that mission than I was having a couple of man-pats get really close to me. Shooting in very close proximity, hearing them say danger close, hearing my rounds hitting in the background on that radio. And, I showed you on the symbology before, the PA and the CIP, and seeing them almost on top of each other, knowing that the secondary sensor was tracking the friendlies and my CCIP is on top of them. I said a very quick prayer before I pushed that button and the gun went off. Please don't let me screw this up. And they're just screaming, just send it, man. We're going to die if you don't. Send it. So, extreme circumstances. So, yeah, that flavor of that board and some other things that have happened to people always kind of stuck in my craw that, nobody ever wanted to just take our side and assume that we were doing the right thing.
Is that part and parcel of being part of the Air Force? You've already talked about broken promises. You've talked about disappointment from your point of view. And do you have to be pragmatic and just accept?
You have to be, and I don't want it to say, oh, I hate the Air Force. I had a wonderful career. I don't regret, my career at all. And like I told you previously, I ended up exactly where I was supposed to be. And maybe that's just how the plan is supposed to happen. The things that got me was the Air Force always preached its core values, and then the Air Force itself would violate its core values, especially integrity. And that was my hang up, the whole time. Usually it was around bad leaders in the institution. We kind of talked about one and how that would happen. And that part was a disappointment, but still, my God, I had an incredible career. He taught me how to fly an airplane. I'm still out there flying today. Um, was able to build a pretty wonderful life for myself and travel and see the world. So, in that part of the whole thing, you just have to be pragmatic. You just have to be. So with combat, I thought I would share a funny story to maybe bring it full circle. Um, and it's just a quick reminder of where we all stand in life and in the world.
But
Go ahead.
hold it for the end, if that's okay. I've got some more questions for you.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Time.
And I have plenty of time, and I want to show you some more video and a small jab at Star Baby. Love him to death, but me shooting a particular target that will not please him.
I think he welcomes people telling giving him a run for his money. So
absolutely.
Let me just before we do the video and the rest of it, I just want to ask you then about that sort of danger close situation. It's two questions really. Do you pre-visualize what you're going to do in certain situations? Do you think about you're obviously very logically minded. You go by prescriptive approach, but obviously you can operate independently of that if you need to. That much is clear. But do you think ahead of time, well, these are my personal limits for what I will accept and what I won't accept? And then the second part of the question is, when someone says to you, just send it because we're going to die anyway, does that all go out the window? Is it academic at that point?
No, it's not academic. And I still had base level brainstem function TTPs that I would employ in that situation. And let me give you an example. If they said, the bad guys are 270 for 29 meters, I might not put the first round 270 at 29 meters. I might put the first round 270 at 50 meters and walk it in that way. My rationale for doing that is now I'm helping add just a slight safety margin, taking any of the gun delta or error out and walking the rounds into the target, but from an aspect that's away from the friendlies to the bad guys. So yes, I did visualize it. I did think about that. I talked about it with my crew relentlessly. My crew probably got tired of me talking. I would have a meeting anytime we started a deployment, and then every week or so we talk about new TTPs or how we were adjusting things. But I would always talk about, hey, if we get into the danger close scenario, here's how we're going to do it. And I want it to be muscle memory for us. So we just fall right on top of our training. The more you have the training and fall on top of your muscle memory, the less likely you are to make mistakes. And that's exactly what we did. And we started in that case slightly away and walked the rounds in. Luckily, that night the gun was dead on. The 40 millimeter was such a sniper weapon. It was like a sniper, rifle shooting from 10,000 feet away, that you could put those 2-pound projectiles in very, very close to for bad people. And they actually did a fair amount of damage, a decent amount of frag, but if you got a direct hit, it was just going to tear somebody up.
I think that we talked on, maybe we were talking privately rather than when record was on, or it was over email, whatever. But I'd said to you a while back that there was, I really like the Sean Ryan podcast. I don't know if you follow him or watch him, but Navy SEAL guy, and he's fantastic. It's all the operators on. There was an operator he had on a while back, Delta guy, I think, and he was somewhat critical of his own experience at a given point in time of the AC-130 guys not being prepared to shoot in order to support him, and that's obviously something he's carried to this day as something he felt was not justifiable. I don't want to ask you to address that directly because I don't remember the specifics, and it's probably not appropriate anyway. But generally, when you heard that the customer was unhappy, or when there was an expectation that you would fire and you didn't, or when they didn't understand why you were saying what you were saying, how did you resolve that?
Yeah, in a couple of different ways. So I know of at least one guest on Sean Ryan's podcast, and Sean is fantastic, as you alluded to. He gets some great guests, and he's very good at pulling out those key questions. One guest has been very critical of the gunship, and the guy deserves a kick in the nuts because he's lying. He says gunships would not fly during the day, and that's the founder of a certain organization or private company out there. When I saw that, my blood boiled. I actually sent Sean Ryan a note. I don't know if it was him or just one of his staff sent me a thing. Yeah, we'll look into it. And then I never heard another word. And I don't, it's because the guest was a former SEAL or whatever, but he told a bold-faced lie and insulted my community. So screw him. On other occasions, there were not very many occasions when we said we would not shoot. If it was that we were afraid we were going to frat somebody and we didn't have danger close authorization, or we didn't have VID, PID, or there were other factors around that target within the ROE that would restrict us, children, women, things like that. And we took that very seriously. And if an American or a coalition partner wasn't going to die, then I would rather err on the side of caution and safety than kill an innocent. So if that upset them, I'm sorry. Somebody has to be the arbiter there of the ROE and employ to the best of our ability without crossing those lines, morally, ethically, all of that. And everybody I knew in the gunship took it very seriously. There was hardly, I can't think of anybody that said, oh, just mow them all down. Nobody was like that. We were very clinical, very mathematical in what we did. And ultimately all fell on the shoulders of the aircraft commander, me, because I had the A code for the sortie, and I was the one that was going to be judged for what happened. I mean, they'd go after the whole crew, but I bore the responsibility. So I can only think of one or two occasions when I didn't shoot, and I don't believe the ground party was upset by that. I don't know the particular circumstances with the Delta guy. I'd certainly like to, and have a better understanding. I don't know what the rationale was.
Did you operate with, I mean, you may not be able to answer the question, but did you operate with other coalition forces? There's an interview I did with Ned Lynch. He and his wingman Wolfman went out and were the first responders in inverted commas for I think it was Bravo 20, an SBS bunch guys in the Iraqi desert, Western Iraq, and I know it was an AC-130 that eventually rolled in there and helped those guys out. They were surrounded. So my question would be really, you worked with those guys. Was there a difference? Is there standardization across all the tiers, the tiered forces? What were your experiences of working with the Brits?
The Brits were just fantastic. Always, obviously, the accent on the radio, but the SAS and SBS guys were just incredible, super professional. But we had the added benefit within AFSOC that we routinely brought those folks to Hurlburt, and we trained with them. We always had calls for fire training out of the range, and it was cycling people through all the time. And I can recall in combat a time or two recognizing the voice of the person that I had trained with back at home station. And there's a synergy that comes from that. That's what SOF constantly preaches. Like in the gunship, almost every single mission is a live fire mission. And a lot of, I don't think an F-16 goes out and does strafe every single mission. They don't have the budget. There are only 8 gunships, so we had ammo to do that. And we were constantly training with those partners. So you built that intimacy of understanding with them. The Brits were fantastic. I worked with the Danes and a couple other countries. They were all equivalent to the American forces that I work with. I saw no difference in their capability or standards. I truly loved working with the Brits. They were just, not to say they were happy, but they were just, okay, let's get on with it, the stiff upper lip, and let's press and get the mission done, regardless whatever the obstacle was. I'm like, that is so refreshing. Let's get the mission done and execute.
Did you have, as a community then, did you have not an exchange program, but some kind of liaison where maybe you would take them and fly them? I mean, I'm not talking about the Brits, but I'm just talking about the special operations community, the soldiers, where you fly them so they could see exactly what it looked like from the airplane.
We did, and that was such a great learning tool because the perspective on the ground is obviously very different. We would tell our own folks about it, but when we put them up in the airplane and, they'd give out a range and bearing on the range, And for us, it's very easy. We have the God's eye view. We see where the friendlies are, and we can see the range, the bearing, and we're like, how did they mess that up? Well, they're on the ground. The terrain is undulating up and down and all that, and there's obstacles in the way, so they can't do it. So that training was great for both sides, that perspective. We routinely did that at Hurlburt, flew many soft partners from other nations on the airplane. And a place where we really did a lot was actually Korea on our deployments over there. Had quite a few Korean soft fly on the airplane to see what the capability of our sensors were, to see the integration and the work on the crew for prosecuting targets. And we learned a lot from them as well. So yeah, that's a great question, Steve, because that perspective, where you sit is the view that you have, but it may not be the view that the other person has of the battle space. So a very great training opportunity.
Can I ask you about your second DFC?
You can ask.
Well, okay, let me rephrase the question. Please tell us about your second DFC if you're able to.
I'm not able to.
You're not able to. Okay.
Okay.
This is something you can talk about. I've interrupted you completely. You were in a flow, and I've interrupted you. So this is my last question. Then you can get back to because I think you said you got some video to show and stuff. But I don't know if you'll be embarrassed by me saying this, but it is public knowledge. You messaged me earlier in the week saying, look, my wife's telling everybody, but and now it's out there. And I already knew that you had been inducted into the is it the Air Commando Hall of Fame?
Yeah,
Air Commando Hall of Fame, and there's a glowing description of your contribution to AFSOC, and you're amongst 3 or 4 other guys who have all done phenomenal things. I just am curious to know how you feel about that. Truly, then, so you are obviously very humble, credible, approachable. I guess that's the ethos of the weapons school. That's you. It was interesting seeing you interact with one commenter on the Sky Raider 2 video where he told you to stay in your lane, and you just whatever, you're just a classy guy. But how do you feel about that induction?
It's hard to describe. It is. I'll put it this way: the Air Commando Association is a fantastic group of humans, and they're recognizing soft professionals, and to even have my name whispered with those other folks just blows me away. In fact, 2 of the guys that were inducted with me, one of them, Mike D'Argenio, just holy cow, he's a giant. So that is very humbling. But Major General Bill Holt is the current. I think he's the president of the Air Command Association, but he's the one that called me, and Bill's an old friend. And I had no idea. I had even been nominated. And it's humbling. I don't know why I get a little emotional because it's just validating. That grind we went through with the weapons school, that was a very tough 6.5 years. And popping out the other side and seeing how successful the program is today. And knowing that I still mentor people. I've been retired for 9 years. I still mentor people to this day. I had a phone call with a guy last night who's struggling just a little bit in his career, trying to figure out what to do. And that's just who I am. That becoming a weapons officer changed my life for the good. And it's validating to know that somebody else realizes that I tried to give my best to the community. So that's how I view it.
It sounds to me like it's totally deserved. I think I said to you, over email. You were sort of quite self-deprecating. So, but it sounds to me like that all of these things are deserved from your point of view. So,
yeah, I should have gone to med school. I'd have been a crappy proctologist, but
that's what you would like to have done. To spend your time with your finger inside a guy's asses.
Probably, yeah.
All right. Okay.
Like I said, God's plan worked out. That was not meant for me. So.
All right. Well, let's get back to your videos and talk.
You better edit that out. I don't want me associated with a finger in a guy's butt. All right. How about some video, man?
Yeah. Let's do a show reel.
All right. And then I will finish up with
The
a
story.
story.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So let's go share. Actually, this is what it looks like when 40 is being shot on the range at night. Just single shot. The frag you can see is from there's a type of metal in those rounds called mish metal.
Wow.
So you can see the frag and it just lights everything up on the ground. Pretty cool.
What is the? I mean, I know you said earlier that the specifics are classified, but is there a rule of thumb, an unclassified rule of thumb for the lethal distance of a 40 mil to a person?
We didn't have lethal distances. We had danger close distances, and those
Okay.
are classified.
Yeah. Okay.
But you just never know. And here, let me show this 105, then I'll tell you a quick story about how you just never know. Let's see, where'd the video go? There we go. I think I've got audio playing, and oh, there we go.
Yeah, I'm
There
not
we
hearing
go.
any audio at this end.
All right, well, that's
No
a good
idea.
thing.
Okay.
So 105's hitting at night.
How far away is the camera?
I think they're about 750 meters
Wow.
in this case. So I'll show another one here in a second, but let me stop. Let me describe a very unique incident I had with 105. Was shooting a meeting house, bunch of bad guys inside. So we're putting rounds into the building and had some gun error. So the gun was shooting slightly inaccurate. We're trying to sort that with the crew. And I see all of these guys unass the building and start, trying to run to this little break in the compound. Everything in Afghanistan is a compound. It's all these walls around buildings and stuff. It's kind of hard to describe it. It's like a maze. And I see these guys all running for the exit. We shift over, put the CCIP on this little opening in the gate, shoot a 105. And in the video, when we slowed it down later, there's a group of guys and it comes over the shoulder of one of the guys. And I think it nicked his ear. And then it went into the ground in front of him. And when it went off, it wiped everybody out. And he stumbled around, turned around, and ran the other way.
Wow.
And again, that's that function that the projectile comes down at a 60-degree angle. And when it hits the dirt, it will throw frag forward. But when it's going straight down, luck or serendipity, whatever, it didn't kill him. But you could see him flinch when the round came down.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Hitting a crate that had some missiles in it.
Wow. Is this the sensor operator view?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is the IR.
Wow.
I believe I already showed you that one.
No, it's new.
No, I skipped over and went to this one. If you look, this is a building that we've hit, and you can see the smoke pouring out of the windows and stuff. But when the roof of this collapsed, you can see the air pressure change. Let me play it again. But that's what it would look like a lot of times when we'd fire a round. This gas is there. It is right there. All the gas would exit out of the windows. It was.
And that little flight path marker just sort of jumped in front of the. Is that showing the sensor operator what you're looking at? If you play it,
play for a second. Oops, here we go. Oh, okay.
There it is.
So that's the CCIP, and we're shooting trainable. And when we're shooting trainable, the hydraulics are moving the gun up and down, following where the sensor's aiming to make up for any deviations in the orbit. So if the wind's pushing me out, the gun can train over and compute a lead lag angle to compensate for that. But what I have to do is I still have to maneuver the airplane to remain on geometry. And that CCIP is kind of like the center point of my bank angle, if you will. And it's telling me, hey, I'm below, so I'm trying to get back inside I've been pushed out a little bit, or it's up above the horizon line. I'm probably trying to shallow out my bank angle and get in a position to roll back in. I showed you on the previous episode when you got the hash marks when you're outside the trainable gun limits or the trainable box limits. So that's what's going on here. I'm maneuvering. We did have a lot of wind over there at times in Afghanistan, sometimes as much as 60 knots at altitude. So you really had to work hard. Even when you were in that most accurate mode shooting on a trainable, you had to work hard as a pilot to keep it so you could shoot throughout the entire orbit.
Okay.
So that's what's going on there. Um, okay, die tired is a kind of an interesting one. That's the one I showed you before. There was the pop and the smiley face on the ground. You'll see it
Yeah.
here and again, shooting procs. And then one of the issues we had here, as you can see, the terrain over in Afghanistan was very, very different. You're not shooting flat. There's the pop and the smiley face. So we had to compensate for that quite often as well. Some people moving around.
Yeah.
Boom. There's another pop
Wow.
and a smiley
Big
face. You
smile.
can see
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you expect those guys in the frame there to be injured then?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Those newer proximity rounds are throwing, I think I told you before, 22,000 pieces of
Yeah.
uniform frag, and it's just a pretty nasty situation. So this one is one you and I have talked about. So, wait, I'll get to that in a minute. Let me show you what the 20 millimeters look like. The good old days.
Wow. How
And then,
how visible are you guys when you're shooting? I mean, presumably the 105 puts out a big flash. Those the 20 mils are just a continuous sparkle, I'd imagine. But are you
yeah, you can
exceptionally
see it.
vulnerable when you're shooting?
Yeah, but because both of the Gatling guns are pretty much a suppression weapon, once that started going off, if they were anywhere in the target circle on the ground, they certainly weren't going to stick their nuggets up. But yeah, you can definitely see it at night. So let's see.
Is
I think is this a 40 from the inside? Here we go. This is what it looks like. I told you it's like the old Bofors cannon where they're feeding the rounds.
yeah. Is there much that you can do then in terms of your predictability? Because the old sort of adage with regards to sort of, I suppose, surviving combat is to not be predictable. I mean, even you go back to World War II, it was, don't fly in a straight line for more than whatever, change your altitude, bob and weave and all that kind of stuff. You guys, I guess, are constrained in many respects, aren't you?
Yeah, if in a tick, a troops in contact situation, it's pretty hard to do. I can climb if I had to, but if I'm just there as a presence, I can vary my orbit. On one occasion, shooting here, I'll stop for a second and then I'll come back and show you a couple more. Um, Shooting up in very high terrain where we were having a hard time putting rounds at a target that was on top of a mountain 10,000 feet up, and this guy kept running out of cave and shooting at us. I just drove off for a while.
Hmm.
But then I did the math and I said, okay, guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to fly like a little triangle and come back around. And when we come in, I'm going to come in fast and flat, but I'm going to come in right on the tangent. So as I do that, knowing that I'm on the tangent, I'm in the best possible position. As soon as the gun, if it's trained full forward, comes into the box, now I've got the best opportunity to engage that guy. And sure enough, I skipped around into the cave where he was shooting from. He would shoot and then he'd run back in, and it really pissed me off because he kept doing it. So that's when I did that. And when I came back around, skipped around into the cave, the backside of the mountain blew off. So it must have been full of stuff when it happened. So those are just some of the little things we would try to do to not be predictable. Oh, that's the 25,
Wow.
obviously working.
Wow.
It's a great suppression weapon. And the U models would typically do it in pre-programmed bursts. 50 round, 100 round. They had a limit on the gun of 450 rounds after that. Then they had a cooling period that they had to wait for. But if it was really, something you really had to suppress a whole area, you could throw down a big burst of 450. And
These are obviously mostly sort of in the outfields and things like that. Were you operating in Iraq in towns and built up areas? So how were your weapons effects in those sorts of scenarios?
well, this video right here, excuse me, is in a Najaf, so
Okay.
it's a built up area. Um, yeah, it's different if it was like an urban area, and we actually practice scenarios like that even after um, 9/11 and all that stuff happened. We would go to some bigger American cities and do vehicle follows and vehicle stalking as they were driving through the city. And you have things like urban canyon effect. How do you mitigate? There's a big building, and as you come around part of the orbit, you can't see anything on the ground because you got this 27-story building that's blocking your view. So we developed TTPs to deal
Okay.
with that as well.
Okay. This view here, Buck. What is the sort of little collection of things at the top of the crosshair there? There's an
So
X that's floating around, but what's that little bunch of fly-looking things?
So those are some things are blocked out there. This is the U model. So they had different data blocks that would tell them different things. And they had an A channel and a B channel. So they had dual target attack before we did. So they could attack two targets on the ground simultaneously, and the computer would set up a center orbit point. So that's just some of the data blocks that would tell them different things about where the airplane is, where the gun's pointing, and what their limits are.
Okay.
Let me find, this is the one we talked about. Sorry.
You're going to show the boat one.
This is the boat. And this is, I guess I shouldn't say who it is, but is a good friend of mine was the one that did this. So you can't hear the audio, which is said, but they have, as this is happening, they have a failure to fire of the number 2 gun on the U model, which is actually the 40 millimeter. So the gunner, in the haste of all the communications, is requesting approval to manually fire it. So he wants to reach up with his bar and hit this little plunger that'll try to get the round to go off manually. So it's crazy. Things that happen in combat only happen in combat. All the lunacy and the crazy, and it happened during this particular engagement with the boat. And I'll let this play out because it's pretty cool what happens here. That's a 105 hitting right on top of it.
Oh, not showing.
It's not showing?
Nope.
Oh, okay, let's well, let me rewind it. And then there we go. Share. There we go. Boom. There we go.
Showing now. Yep.
All right. One each Iraqi patrol boat is no more. Oh, it didn't rewind, so here we go. So if you look here, here, and right there, those were 40 millimeters hitting. As that's happening, they're getting ready to shoot the 105, and that's when the 40 millimeter, the number 2 gun, actually had a failure to fire.
Okay.
But luckily, the 105 is going to do its job.
Wow.
And there it goes down below the water.
Wow.
First confirmed gunship sinking of a ship.
What is the strangest thing that you have heard of a gunship killing?
Um, well, an alligator.
An alligator.
Yeah, I killed an alligator, and I didn't do it with the gun. I did it with the landing gear. So at Hurlburt Field, on the north end of the field, there's a lake near the golf course called Gator Lake. And one night I was landing, and there was an alligator on the runway, and I ran him over. I killed a fox one night too, accidentally. And the way that happened, that was actually on the approach end, and the IR is typically scanning out on the runway looking for stuff. And he said, "Hey, pilot, I had just touched down." He said, "There's something on the runway." I flipped my NVGs down real quick, and there's a fox, and he's going from left to right. I'm like, okay, I'm still going like 90 knots, but I can just tap the rudder and I'll aim for where he's been. And what did he do? He stopped, turned around, and ran right back in front of me, and I ran him over. So yeah, so I've killed an alligator and a fox. Those are pretty strange.
Do you what was it you were saying that you killed earlier that was different? The hind. Did you put a hind kill marking on the airplane for that?
No,
No.
no,
Okay.
no. I probably should have, but no, we didn't.
Okay.
Let me show you one last video. It's the 25 on the U-boat whaling away. It's a pretty cool video of them shooting, and you'll get a view inside of the Gatling going off. Just spitting fire.
Wow. Do you have video of you remember you said that you had sunk that little, I don't think you said it was a special forces boat, but it was a boat that had been hired.
It was a sunfish sailboat that they
Okay.
had gotten from the recreation people
Okay.
and were towing behind it. I think I do have that video somewhere, but it's on like a mini cassette and it's tucked away. And I've got a whole bunch of those that I need to convert one day. If I can find it, I'll send it to you.
What about hub video, Buck? Is there anything that you can show us that shows what you see?
No, we didn't really. I think I had the only video I had was what I showed you in the first episode,
Yeah.
but we didn't have a camera recording the HUD view of all things. Isn't that crazy?
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
Mm-mm. The video that was recorded was from the sensors, the TV and the IR.
Yeah. What about F4? You got any pictures of?
Oh, yeah. Goodness gracious! Thank you for saving me. All right. Well, Star Baby, my friend, this is for you. Let's get over here. So out at Cannon, when I was the vice wing commander there, the guys got together and said, "Hey, we found these pristine targets, and we'd like you to go out and shoot them, sir." So, yeah, pretty cool view of the F4 right here.
Yeah.
Before
the D model, I think.
Yep. And,
oh dear, it's going to make me sad.
That's after just one engagement. Pretty cool. You can see a 40 millimeter hit there, a 30 millimeter hit there, shoot it up.
Wow.
But that's not the best part. So here it is after one training sortie with TP rounds.
Are they non-explosive TP?
Yeah, non-explosive.
Okay.
So I presume you can see that. And then my Finney flight before I left, I went out there with a bunch of high explosive and had a little bit of fun. And this was the aftermath.
Wow.
Yes, a sad end to a great warrior, but she went out a combat veteran.
Wow. That's phenomenal. Tell us your story then.
Okay. So flying a couple of those missions, we flew some, but we still can't talk about some higher end missions. And we were tasked to fly one that got a lot of people nervous. And I remember going out, I was out at the plane. I told you I had my little walk around thing that I did. And the guys were out there and they said, hey, boss, do you mind if we get the chaplain to bless the plane? And that was really kind of out of left field for my guys. There were a couple guys I knew that were religious, and a couple guys struggled with things. I mean, I had a guy that, I almost had to hold him like a baby because he was convinced we were going to die if he flew that night. And I said, no, I'm going to get you home. Don't worry. But everybody had their own little coping mechanism. So when they came to me and said, hey, we'd like to do this, I'm like, okay. And we had this chaplain there. I remember his name, but I don't want to out him. And he would sit in on all our crew briefs. And I think he was a reservist, but he was very quiet, but he was always there. And he had this golf cart, and he would always drive out and watch us launch. And he was always there when we recovered the next morning. So I went and found him, and I said, "Hey, Padre, I was talking to the crew, and they were wondering, would you mind blessing the airplane tonight?" And he was like, of course, of course. So we go out to the airplane. The whole crew comes around to the front of the nose here, and he has us all stand in a circle. He puts one hand up on the airplane, and he starts saying some stuff about blessing the airplane, but really bless the crew and bring them all home safe. And it was a very interesting moment. Well, we get in the airplane, and we take off, and everything broke on the airplane that night. Everything possible broke on the airplane. And I think I landed three. I even lost an engine. And yeah, because I had to fly an approach, three engine. Once you got on the other side of the Hindu Kush in Afghanistan, we didn't have comms back to K2. They hadn't set up the SATCOM yet. So I took off thinking the weather was going to be clear in a million. And when I lost an engine, I actually had to snake through the mountains. I was looking up at campfires up at 16,000 feet up in the mountains in the Hindu Kush, thinking, man, there's people living up there. But I'm snaking through on three engines trying to get back to the base. I get on the other side of the Hindu Kush and start talking to the base. They're like, hey, you got to go somewhere else. We're screwed. We're 200. No, we're 100.5 with blowing sand. And I'm like, wait a minute. I just dumped all my gas because I'm three engine and the forecast is clear in a million. How do you go from clear in a million to 100.5? And it was a sandstorm that had popped up. So all we had was a mobile TACAN. And I talked to the nav, and I had her. We didn't have self-contained approaches at that point. We were still in the building block of doing it, but I had her build an approach in the system. And I told the crew, I said, we don't have the gas to go anywhere else. I'm just going to fly this thing all the way to impact if that's what I have to do. And we had a technique where it was a brand new co-pilot too. And the technique was the more experienced pilot would fly the approach and just wire the approach to the best of his or her capability. And the other person would be outside. And the thought was, especially if you're flying an approach to MINS, you didn't want a bunch of movement at low altitude just as you break out and you're trying to get to the runway. So the other person is already acclimated to seeing, the runway environment and all of that. They would take the airplane and land. So I am flying this approach. I've got like 35 knots of crosswind. I'm flying at three engine, and I am working my tail off. And finally, my co-pilot says, and I'm at 150 feet. He goes, I got the runway. I got the runway. So I come up off the instruments a little bit, and I'm looking, and all I see is milky white. And I'm like, where? And he said, over there. And it was the crosswind plus being on three engines. I was really crabbing down. And I'm like, okay, this is beyond his capability. I got it. I landed the airplane, taxied back, shut down. My hands were shaking a little bit. I'm like, okay. And who comes trolling along but the Padre in his golf cart? I come marching off the airplane. I'm like, excuse me, a word, please. And I said, Padre, I thought I asked you to bless the airplane tonight. And he said, well, it got you home, didn't it, my son? What am I supposed to say at that point? He was exactly right. He did exactly what I asked. I got my crew home. I got the airplane home. But yeah, even in combat, you get funny things happen to you that you'll never forget.
That's brilliant. So you've been, as you just said, you've been retired for 9 years. To close out this interview then. Oh, that's so good. To close out this interview then, what has changed in the airplane in those 9 years, and what is then, do you think, the future? I was curious to read, and I know that you, in retirement, well, not retirement from the Air Force, but you worked for this company and you have some association with it, but the idea of these small cruise missiles being launched from AC-130, you've mentioned that tube type thing behind you, which was news to me, but what's changed and what is coming up?
Yeah, with the kind of the breaking point, or not breaking point, but the transition point started with the AC-130W. Those were those additional gunships we got at the end that I told you about. When they started, they brought on a new fire control system called PSP, Precision Strike Package, that not only enabled using the gun, but enabled using other munitions that come out of the common launch tube. And a common launch tube is called common, so you can stick a variety of munitions in there as long as they meet certain parameters. In the case of the whiskey gunship, they used to shoot a beam riding weapon. Now, basically, it spit out of the back of the airplane. It would open up its seeker and then follow the laser down to the target, and it was a great weapon to use. Since then, they have evolved into other munitions. There's a munition, small glide munition, which is a bit more capable than some of the stuff that we had in the early days. The J models all today have a 30 millimeter, a 105, despite the effort of some people to take the 105 off, the 105 remains. They have the ability to employ small diameter bomb, which I love that munition. I think there's still work to do, but it brings a lot of capability to the battlefield. Hellfire, those can all be mounted on that same pylon. And then a variety of weapons that come out of the common launch tube, from small glide munition to some other things. And then, as you alluded to, the advent of the small cruise missile. That is an industry is doing what they call a CRADA. It's a cooperative arrangement with the government to develop this capability to get affordable munitions in mass. And in the old days when you had a Tomahawk that cost $2 or $3 million, that's not really cost effective. But if you can get a cruise missile with 500-600 nautical mile range for less than $250,000, you start to change the calculus. And if you can stick a whole bunch of them inside of an airplane, inside of a C-130, then maybe AFSOC is relevant in the fight out in the Pacific and Indo-PACOM. Because what you're trying to do in that fight, at least from my perspective, is you're trying to change the calculus of the Chinese. If you have a whole different angle of approach, then that's a whole new angle of approach they have to defend against. So in the case of the small cruise missile, they have tested it off the gunship because the PSP package is in there. But if you were to put it on, say, an MC-130, you could put over 100 of those in a single C-130.
Good.
And you spit them out en masse. You add some AI so they talk to each other. They coordinate their attack. And you can hold things at risk from 500 or 600 nautical miles away. That kind of changes what's going on in the battle space. So I'm very excited that the gunship has done that. I mentioned a small diameter bomb. One real quick thing on a small diameter bomb. When I was the vice commander at Cannon, the whiskey gunship squadron was still trying to validate them. I think it was a Ripple 8. They wanted to be able to ripple 8 of them all off all at once. And the closest range out there that could handle that, we had a range near Cannon called Melrose, but it wouldn't handle small diameter bomb. Was the Wismar range over in White Sands. So, but you had to pay to use it. So the squadron commander comes to my office, and he says, "Hey, boss, I have a proposal, but you need to let me get all the words out before you say no." I'm like, "Oh, this is going to be fun." And he's like, "Hey, we got to do the Ripple 8 test, and I have a plan, and we're going to go to Hawaii." I'm like, and he goes, "Sir, you promised." I'm like, Okay. And they had done the cost benefit analysis because there's a range off the coast of Kaneohe, which is on the east side of Oahu. It's a Marine Corps base and a range it's a water range, and it's free to use. Whereas Wismar, the range that was like a 32-minute flight from our base, was $1 million. And he said, "Sir, I can take 2 gunships, the crews, the maintenance, everybody to Kaneohe for 10 days for less than $1 million that I would have to pay to use at the range that's 32 minutes away." And I'm like, it is hard to beat that argument. Approved. And they did it. And they went out there, and it was a smashing success. So, I really like small diameter bomb, and anything that's going to add more of a smorgasbord to the capabilities of the J model. Having that J model platform, the future is also they can fly faster, higher, further. Their max peacetime weight in the gunships I flew was 155,000. I mentioned that before. I believe in the J, it's 165,000. And those 6-bladed props, in those engines, they have so much power. I talked about doing a toboggan at 10,000 feet, trying to AR. I know guys in the J model who've done AR up at 21,000 feet on a hot day, like it was nothing. They just go up there and plug in. So the future of the gunship is bright. Especially now that we have one common fleet. Yes, we have a couple different blocks, and they're working through that. Those are mostly software mods and things like that. but having one common gunship allows so many good things to happen, including a cross flow between the squadrons. So the knowledge base isn't based on, oh, well, you flew this, it's different here. No, we're all one gunship. And they continue to incorporate new weapons and new concepts. So even more deadly on the battlefield. And the men and women are flying and are just out there doing great things every night. It's funny. I walked out last night. My wife's out of town, so it was kind of quiet here. I walked out in the street, and if I look to the west, I can see the airspace over Hulbert, and I can see a couple gunships over there. If I look a little bit over to the northeast, the ranges are there. I hear them shooting, and I can look out and see one. And I'm like, yep, they're still there. My time has come and passed, but they're still out there. The gunships are still flying every night, training, practicing, and representing America.
Do you find it difficult to let go? I mean, it's obvious that you're still very much emotionally, psychologically engaged. You do the speaking arrangements with regards to the graduation nights at the WIC, as you described. Is it easy? And because you're very close to it, is it easy to say, well, that's a different life?
It surprisingly it was. There's a couple things that still get me from time to time, but I had the wonderful benefit of the jobs that I had in industry were supporting that community, so I was still tied to them. The other thing is that I continued to mentor people in that community, and yes, I've spoken at weapons school graduations. There's also a professional military education course that the Special Operations University runs, and for many years, I was a guest speaker there. That always felt good to share some of the past. But the one thing that always gets me is when the main highway here that runs in front of Hurlburt, if I left my neighborhood and got on Highway 98 and started driving east, it drives right underneath the approach path to runway 36 at Hurlburt. And when I go past that, the lights for the antennas are there for the ILS and all that. I just think how many times I was in that one little piece of airspace, and I don't get to do that anymore. So that's the only time. I don't miss the Air Force, the BS, but I do miss being around the squadron life. And once in a while, I miss, flying the airplane.
Was it an option for you? I mean, I'll wrap up because it's definitely time for me to go to bed. But what people don't realize is that we've had to do this in 3 parts tonight because of a technical issue and then a child issue on my side. But was it difficult for you to leave the Air Force in the sense that, I mean, so part of the 10% True podcast is that people come on the podcast, they tell their story. It's their story, and it's not challenged. It's not supposed to be, sort of something that is under the microscope and open to, sort of debate and rebuttal and all that kind of stuff. But if we take you at face value, and I'm sure that we can, it seems like you were a great leader. It seems like you were doing good things. Was it difficult for you to leave the Air Force? Was there an option for you to continue your time in the Air Force?
Oh yeah, and I got a lot of grief for getting out when I did. For me, it was just time. I was done. I'd sacrificed a lot for my family, and I didn't want to. I felt like I'd given enough, and I didn't want my family to have to sacrifice anymore for me to, continue to prove myself. It was just time. I came back from that last deployment, and you and I've talked about this picture. I'll share it.
That's that is an amazing photograph.
Right after he hugged me there, he whispered in my ear and he said, "Dad, can you be done?"
Oh my God.
And that was the switch. For me, I was like, I am complete. I am mission complete. I've given what I need to give. And it's time to focus on him and my wife.
Wow.
And my friends. Yeah.
Okay, so final question for you then, Buck. And I know that you've been very careful to not say things that you're not supposed to say and to respect classification and those sorts of things. But I do have a question for you, which relates to that perhaps you can answer. Your second DFC, some of the missions you talk about that are still classified, do you think those will be declassified in the future? Is there more to come from you? Is there a part? This is part 3 technically, but this is an AC-130 part 2. Is there an AC-130 part 3? 5-10 years down the line, what is holding up the declassification of those other things?
Yeah, it'll be a long time before some of those things are talked about, and that's a good thing. America's special forces, the quiet professionals, although probably not very quiet being on a podcast, but trying to respectfully tell the story of my community. But some things should stay classified. The men and women, and I know people who did incredible things, far greater than anything I could ever imagine doing, and they will never get credit. And they're okay with it. And I'm okay with it. At the end of the day, we know the truth. We know what we did, and we know that it mattered. So it's okay that they'll stay classified for 70 years, so long after I'm gone. Which is funny because my son still asks me, Dad, tell me what happened here. And I don't know what you're talking about, and that's okay. Yeah, it's good that they stay undercover.
Well, I think I speak for us all, the audience at home, in saying thank you for telling us what you did, and thank you for sharing your stories and your experiences. Really, it's been a breath of fresh air to hear from a different community, hear from a different aspect of aerial warfare, and you tell it in a very modest and down to earth, and in a very human way. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for sharing it with us. Cheers, Buck.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me on the show. It's a blast. One of these days we're going to have a pint, but I'm happy to call you a mate, and look forward to it.
And you, yeah. and you're a rum drinker, right? So you can have a pint. I'll have rum.
Okay, let's do it. I'm ready.
Thanks so much, Buck. Take care.
Cheers.